Give me a minute.
We're good, Joanna. Good evening. I ask that you please turn your devices to vibrate and mute your microphones on Zoom. We will begin the stated meeting shortly. Madam Majority Leader.
Good afternoon and welcome to the recess stated meeting of May 28th, 2020, being held on June 18th, 2020. Give me one moment as I'm experiencing some technical difficulty. I'll be right with you. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Good evening and welcome to the recess meeting of June 30th, 2020. Once again, I am Majority Leader Lori Cumbo. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you back to this virtual meeting of the New York City Council. If you would like to follow along, the agenda for today's meeting is posted on our website. Since we are resuming the recess stated meeting from earlier today, we will move right into a roll call to establish quorum. Roll call.
Adams.
Present.
Epri Samuel.
Present.
Ayala. Barron. Borelli.
Present.
Brannan.
Present.
Cabrera.
Present.
Chin.
Present.
Cohen.
Here.
Constantinides. Cornegie.
Present.
Deutsch.
Yeah.
Diaz.
Presente.
Drum.
Here.
Eugene.
Present.
Gibson.
You got me?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. Councilmember Gibson.
Present.
Jonai.
Present.
Grodenchik.
Here.
Holden.
Here.
Kalos.
Here.
King.
Present.
Koo.
Present.
Kozlowitz.
Here.
Landsman.
Present.
Lander.
Here.
Levin.
Here.
Levine.
Present.
Lewis.
Present.
Mizell. Menchaca.
Presente.
Miller.
Present.
Moya.
Present.
Perkins,
Present.
Powers,
Here.
Reynoso,
Present.
Richards,
Present.
Rivera,
Present.
Rodriguez,
Presente.
Rose,
Present.
Rosenthal,
Here.
Salamanca,
Present.
Torres,
Present.
Traeger,
Here.
Ulrich,
I'm tired, but I'm here.
Malone,
Here.
thank you. Van Bramer,
Here.
Yeager,
Here.
Mizell, Adio,
Here.
Cumbo,
Present.
Speaker Johnson.
I'm here.
Madam Majority Leader, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We will now have the adoption of minutes from Council Member Ayala.
I make a motion that the minutes of the stated meeting of June 18th, 2020 be adopted as printed.
Thank you, Council Member Ayala. We will now have messages and papers from the mayor.
None.
Supplemental communication from city, county, and borough offices.
M244, Board of Elections appointment.
Received, ordered, printed, and filed.
Petitions and communications.
None.
Land use call-ups.
None.
Thank you. We will now have communication from Speaker Corey Johnson.
Good evening, everyone. Negotiating the city's budget each year is one of the most important responsibilities of the city council and one that I take very seriously. I have been proud to stand with my colleagues for the past 2 years and celebrate the victories that the city council fought for and won on behalf of the people of our great city. Unfortunately, today is not a day of celebration. We are not in a time of celebration. It is a time of necessity. And today's budget agreement is one of necessity. These budget negotiations have reflected that fact. We knew how important this work was to New Yorkers. Our city has faced so much pain these last few months. On March 1st, New York City confirmed our first case of COVID-19. And since then, we have lost over 22,000 New Yorkers to the coronavirus. Millions of us were confined to our homes as many New Yorkers lost their jobs or watched their businesses fold. And we were left with a $9 billion revenue shortfall. Heart-wrenching, impossible choices had to be made. It was not easy. But collectively, the council was determined that even in the midst of the worst financial crisis anyone had ever seen, we would do our best to protect and preserve as many vital programs and services as we could for New Yorkers. We sought to address injustice and inequity. We asked ourselves, line by line, does this program support the social safety net? Does it address systemic inequality? And will it help communities hit hard in the pandemic recover from both COVID and the recession? It was deliberative, it was painstaking, and it was difficult work. But even in the midst of the worst economic crisis our city has faced in decades, we fought hard and we stuck to our principles. The City Council's budget negotiating team literally went line by line to find and save programs that never should have been cut in the mayor's executive budget. We fought for and managed to restore summer youth employment, Compass, Beacon, Cornerstone, Summer Camp, and other youth programs. That means more than 35,000 young people will get job training in just a couple of weeks for the summer, and at least 70,000 kids will go to summer camp this summer. I want to say we did this because investing in our young people is the right thing to do. And there's a lot of people to thank, but I especially want to thank our Majority Leader, Lori Cumbo, but even above her, and I love her, Councilmember Debbie Rose, the chair of our Youth Services Committee, has been unbelievable, literally day in and day out these last many months, fighting for every slot, every dollar, every detail. Debbie, you are just the best champion that youth in New York City have. And we wouldn't be at this agreement today, honestly, if it wasn't for you and the work you did with young people and advocates and how you pushed us and the administration to do more. So I want to thank you, Debbie, for everything you've done. We also restored social workers and guidance counselors to our schools, including the Single Shepherd Guidance Counselor Program, which was completely zeroed out in the city's budget, in the executive budget. And I'm especially proud that we fought for and won $100 million in restoration for fair student funding. Schools that need this money. It was zeroed out in the mayor's executive budget. We restored it $100 million. That will keep school budgets whole at possibly the worst and most challenging time in our city's history for educators, parents, and students. And I will not try to begin to describe what our BNT meetings have been like these last many weeks and months. But Mark Traeger is really a hero for school children in New York City, fighting tooth and nail for fair student funding, fighting tooth and nail for the Single Shepherd program, which doesn't even affect his district, but affects children in central Brooklyn and the South Bronx, fighting tooth and nail for every education dollar we could come up with, not cutting classrooms or teachers, but actually finding savings in bus contracts and in regional offices and other things that we knew wouldn't affect school classrooms. Mark was there every step of the way, fighting, haggling, cajoling, screaming on behalf of the children in New York City. And so I want to thank you, Mark Traeger, for your leadership. You helped get us to this point tonight. The council also successfully fought to bolster our food pantry funding. Food insecurity is a problem even in times when our economy is strong. We have been through hell with COVID-19, and we know that more people than ever need help putting food on the table. And I want to thank Council Members Levin and Grudenchik, who have been fighting on these issues for food access for years. There is so much that we fought for and won that will help the city in this difficult time. I could literally go on and on, restoring money for fair futures for foster youth so that they have mentors and coaches, fully restoring the CUNY ASAP program. The mayor's budget sought to cut it by over $30 million. We fully restored CUNY ASAP, 100% restoration of the CUNY ASAP program. Libraries, we fought like hell to get libraries funded. Domestic violence programs, our initiatives for domestic violence, for sexual violence, saw no cuts, 0 cuts on Dove money, 0 cuts on the groups that help survivors, no cuts there. Margaret Chin, I can't begin to describe her advocacy for seniors. And there are some small cuts, but we were surgical, we were thoughtful in how we got there. We trimmed away things that we thought we could go without for the next year. And Margaret was fighting every step of the way for older adults in New York City. She was one of the most fantastic members of the budget negotiating team. I am enormously grateful for her friendship. And Margaret, we are really grateful for you. Housing programs. We restored a lot of money that was cut in housing programs. There's still cuts that we don't like to HPD, especially on the capital side and some other things. But our chair, Robert Cornegie, and Councilmember Carlina Rivera were insistent in the budget negotiating team of protecting as many of these programs as possible, given that we know that New Yorkers are in a precarious situation in the coming months when the eviction moratorium might be up. That's why we need this federal help from Washington. These programs are programs that we have spent years building up in the council, and they are programs we need right now to help us move forward from COVID. We did not get the help that we needed from the feds. They haven't come through. We did not get help from the state. They actually cut us. So this has been an enormously challenging situation. In addition to dealing with the fallout from COVID-19, from our economy being in free fall, this budget was also negotiated while our city and our nation were dealing with the ramifications of another deadly disease, racism, generations and centuries of racism. On March 13th, Breonna Taylor was unarmed when she was killed by police officers in her own home in Louisville, Kentucky. On March 18th, Stephon Clark was unarmed when he was killed by police officers in his grandmother's backyard in Sacramento, California. And on March 25th, George Floyd was unarmed when he was killed, murdered by an officer kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds while George Floyd begged for his life, yelling out for his mother. That is just a small number of the people that have been killed, unarmed Black people killed by police officers over the last many months and year. Millions of Americans of all races took to the streets and demanded a change to a system of policing that overwhelmingly targets Black and brown people. Many of my colleagues and I joined in some of these protests and were inspired by them. It is no secret that I was in favor of at least $1 billion in spending cuts from the NYPD. This budget does not include that level of cut for the NYPD. It contains an agreement to make some transformative changes at the department, though. We're taking school safety out of the NYPD, undoing a destructive policy put in place by then Mayor Rudy Giuliani. And we want to move it towards a community model, a model that talks with students and teachers and principals and parents and labor, a model that's about restorative justice, not about arresting our young people, not about having agents with handcuffs. We're removing the NYPD from homeless outreach. We're reducing the head count by well over 1,000 officers to create ongoing savings. These are real changes, and I stand by what we're able to accomplish. To everyone who is disappointed, and I know that there are many, many people who are disappointed that we could not go further, I'm disappointed as well. I wanted us to go deeper. I wanted us to take larger headcount reductions. I wanted a true hiring freeze. I wanted us to cancel additional classes. But this is a budget process that involves the mayor, who would not budge on these items, and 49 other council members currently, many of whom were not as supportive of the $1 billion and the kind of cuts that some of us were pushing for. This was an unprecedented budget, and there were many things that we had to protect. But I am proud of the changes that we secured, especially given the challenges we faced, given the $9 billion revenue shortfall. I do wish we had done more to cut the NYPD, but I also know this fight is not finished. This is the beginning. It was and is one of the honors of my life to work with my colleagues in this city council for the city that I love. We are going to reimagine policing in New York City, and we're not going to stop until we get there. I believe that we can rise to the great challenge of our time and create the kind of city we know New York can be, a just city, one that recognizes our past and fights like hell for a better, more equitable future. A New York that ends police brutality, school segregation, and housing discrimination. A New York that protects our most vulnerable and picks up our sisters and brothers who have fallen. That's the city I want. That's the New York that I believe in. So let's build it together. I will end by saying this has been a hard process. It's been a challenge for me to try to reach consensus. I have done my best. My best may not be enough for many New Yorkers. My best may not be enough for many council members. But I really do want you to know, New Yorkers who are listening, members that are on this call tonight, I did my best to reach consensus from what the budget negotiating team wanted, from what other members were comfortable with, and having a mayor that wouldn't budge on the additional cuts. We fought like hell to restore these programs. He wanted to wipe out education dollars, CUNY dollars, human and social services, single shepherd, and the list goes on. We got those programs restored. In the executive budget, they were at zero. And the only reason why they are being restored tonight is because of this body, is because of us coming together to fight those cuts. So there is a lot more work to do. We need help from the federal government. We need the billions of dollars in revenue replacement to get our city back on track. We need help from Albany. I believe we should raise taxes on the rich to create more revenue. And we need help from them on changing abusive policing as well. I wish we could go in and just fire cops right now that have a bad CCRB history, that should not be cops. But we cannot do that at this moment. We need changes at the state level to enable us to do that. We have an outdated, broken disciplinary system. We need to get rid of qualified immunity at the federal level. There's a lot we need to do. So I know tonight is the beginning, not the end. And I want you all to know that I look forward to standing with you as we push further, as we try to do better. I commit myself to doing that. And the last thing that I want to say before I turn it back to the majority leader, I am really grateful, more than I can describe, to every single Black member of the city council who have stepped up, not even just since George Floyd was murdered. They were having these conversations and pushing these things before George Floyd was murdered. This conversation didn't start when George Floyd was murdered. And over the last many weeks, over the last 5 weeks since that murder in Minneapolis, our Black colleagues have inspired me. They have taught me a lot. I am really grateful for the leadership of the BLAC under chairs Danique Miller and Adrienne Adams. I am really grateful that we have been able to listen to our Black colleagues on what is important to them and to not get out in front of them, to not pretend like we know better than them, to not act like I know what's best for them and their constituents. So I am tremendously grateful for each and every one of them, not just for the work we've done during this budget, but the work that they do year round that many people don't know about. I want to continue to work with them, learn from them, listen to them, let them lead, step aside sometimes so they can be the ones doing that, because that is what this is about for me, listening to them. So I want to thank you all. Tonight's budget is not an easy budget. There are a lot of people who are not going to be happy, but I do believe we did the best we could. And I'm asking you all to support this budget because I do think it is the best we could do given the circumstances that we're in right now. Thank you very much. With that, Madam Majority Leader, I turn it back to you.
Thank you, Speaker Corey Johnson, for your leadership, for recognizing the importance of consensus building, of hearing us out, for coming up with the best proposal and plan that you possibly could, given all of the dynamics of a very diverse body of 51 members of all races, nationalities, and religions. We appreciate your leadership and for hearing us. We will now move into discussion of general orders. If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand function in Zoom, or you can hold your comments to your vote in the upcoming moments. I will ask the parliamentarian, are there any members that wish to speak now during discussion of general orders, or will we be able to go right into the vote?
Madam Majority Leader, the first three council members who wish to speak are Councilmember Drum, Councilmember Richards, and Councilmember Koo.
I'll save my remarks for the vote. Thank you.
Councilmember Drum,
Time starts now. I'll also save my remarks till the vote.
Councilmember Ku.
Time starts now.
I'll save it till the vote.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Ku. Parliamentarian, are there any additional members that wish to speak at this time? Or will they be holding their votes for their remarks for the vote?
Council members Barron, Landsman, and Van Bramer.
Time starts now.
Councilmember Barron. Councilmember Barron, you are still muted.
Councilmember Barron, are you there?
Muted now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
I can hear you.
Thank you. Since my remarks were long, I'll split them and do half now and half to explain my vote. First, I want to acknowledge the work of the finance staff under the direction of LaTanya McKinney. And second, I want to thank the members of the budget negotiating team for their participation in a very arduous task. And thanks for delivering to BNT the concerns that were expressed in our delegation meetings. And the restorations which were achieved reflect the persistence of council members to push the administration to fund council initiatives and programs providing services in various areas, including youth, public school students, students at CUNY's ASAP programs, and other vital services. And just as an aside, it still remains for the governor and the CUNY Board of Trustees to reverse their vote to increase tuition and fees for CUNY students. And as has been said, in March, the city began its response to the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. New York City came to a standstill, literally overnight, and the city transformed the norm for how the society functioned: social distancing, remote learning, virtual conferences, food deliveries, face masks, gloves, constant disinfecting, frequent hand washing. And the devastating consequences caused by COVID-19 made reasonable people, analytical and informed people, have a quick adaptation. And in my second half, I'm going to talk about how the council needs to make just as quick an adaptation to the situation regarding the police. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Barron. Parliamentarian, the next speaker.
Council members Landsman, Van Bramer, and Rose.
Sorry, I meant to save my remarks for when I vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Landsman. Councilmember Van Bramer, followed by Councilmember Rose.
Thank you very much. Millions have been marching all across the world demanding an end to police brutality because Black Lives Matter. We must meet this moment in history. The people have demanded a real $1 billion cut to the NYPD, but also a reimagining of public safety in this city. Sadly, the most historic part of this budget is how badly it manages to meet the moment. The people have spoken through marches and rallies and by occupying City Hall. We must listen to the people we work for. That is our job. We must hear the cries from the streets and respond. The budget does not really defund the NYPD by $1 billion. Over $350 million of the cut is through overtime reduction goals that we know from history is merely a suggestion because the NYPD is able to blow through these overtime numbers. We should have eliminated cadet classes and actively reduced the head count. Moving NYPD to DOE is a good start, but it's going to take 2 years and too long. I'm also disheartened that too many people, too many elected officials don't believe that cultural programs have the ability to save lives, particularly in Black and Brown communities that have been underserved by the arts, and particularly arts in education. This budget cuts arts in classrooms by $15 million. A society that fails to appreciate the role of education, culture, the arts, and libraries in any battle for a more just society is doomed to fail. And it's for those reasons that I'm voting no on this budget.
Councilmember Rose.
Time starts now.
Councilmember Rose, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. We have been working around the clock to negotiate a budget like none that we've ever negotiated before. I want to start by thanking Speaker Johnson for his leadership, for his vision and his support in getting us through these crises and to a point where we have negotiated an on-time budget that impacts our most vulnerable communities and restores cuts to the social safety net. Today's budget is a small but important step forward, significant in that this is the first time that funds have been taken from the NYPD budget to provide programs that empower youth, not imprison youth. I have said throughout this fight that our young people do not need more policing. They need support, guidance, and opportunity. And that is what this budget provides. After weeks of round-the-clock negotiations, we have an agreement that saves the Summer Youth Employment Program and other youth programming that offers young people positive opportunities to learn and grow to their full potential. In April, the mayor abruptly announced that all summer youth programming would be totally cut from this budget, zeroed out. We immediately began to fight to reinstate them. I heard the loud, strong voices of thousands of young people and spent weeks negotiating a budget that restores many of these cuts, not allowing our youth to be collateral damage. This budget makes a direct investment in the lives of 100,000 New York City youth. This adopted budget restores $128.2 million in youth programming, $116 million in summer programming, and $12.2 million in council-funded initiatives. Specifically, at least 35,000 SYEP slots were restored, 2,000 work, learn, growth slots restored, and 70,000 summer camp slots.
Time.
I guess I'll finish when my...
Continue, Councilmember Rose.
Thank you. Thank you. And these positions are afforded the flexibility to allow families a personal option to choose between in-person or online camp models. 12.2 million allotted in council-funded initiatives serving youth through enriched after-school programming, workforce certification programming, youth mentoring, and civic-focused education citywide. Other vital youth programming funded in this budget includes $16.3 million to the council-funded Peter Vallone Academic Scholarship, which funds 25,000 students with scholarships at CUNY. $34 million restored to avoid the imminent cut to CUNY's ASAP program. Again, 25,000 students given financial and academic support, waivers, tuition, and textbooks. $4 million in the Department of Probation to support the NEON program, which will fund various programs and provide slots for 2,240 young people. And then $600 million in capital funds will be now redistributed from the New York Police Department and reinvested in community centers citywide throughout this historic budget negotiation. This budget is unlike any that we've experienced before. The COVID pandemic has not only taken an immense toll on the lives and livelihoods of New Yorkers, but also on the services our city can provide to its residents. As the city faced a $7 billion budget shortfall, the fight to protect youth programs has been an uphill battle. And I thank many of the young people who are out there, the advocates, the providers, and the protesters who raised their collective voices with demands to reinstate these programs. This budget is evidence that your voices have been heard and you sent a powerful message to every level of city government. And again, I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his dogged, unwavering support. I want to thank my colleagues on the budget negotiation team for never backing down from the fight to restore youth jobs, and all of my council colleagues. the City Council Finance Team under the leadership of LaTanya McKinney, who is just phenomenal, with special kudos to Regina Parita Ryan, Isha Wright, and Michelle Peregrine. I want to thank my council staff for their work on this budget and the thousands of New Yorkers, the protesters, the people who relentlessly advocated for a budget that makes investments where they were most needed. And I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rose, and thank you for the work that you have done. Parliamentarian, are there additional speakers at this time?
Majority
Yes,
Leader
madam.
Combo, I was totally remiss, and it's just because I'm a little exhausted, and it was a big miss. We could not do this without LaTanya McKinney and the entire finance division. And I am enormously grateful to LaTanya, to Regina Parita Ryan, to Isha Wright, to all the finance analysts, to the support staff, to everyone in finance. LaTanya has done many budgets. She might tell you this has been the most challenging one she's ever done. But I'm really grateful to her. And I'm grateful to everything she put in. I specifically want to thank Nevin Singh for his work on the NYPD's budget. He was incredible as well. So I want to thank the entire finance division. LaTanya, I love you. You know that. Just enormously grateful for you and everything you do for the council and for our city. So I apologize for not saying it before. It's just a matter of me being pretty tired. I haven't slept much this week. And so I give it back to you, Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you,
Madam
Speaker.
Majority Leader, the
Yes.
next three council members who wish to speak are council members Gibson, Chin, and Borelli.
Councilmember Gibson, you may begin.
Your time starts now.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader, and good evening, Speaker, and all of my colleagues and everyone who is watching. As members of this body, we have the challenging responsibility of making tough decisions that will have a long-term impact on all New Yorkers, including those most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We started this budget process from a place of zero, with the administration unwilling to fund and support valuable safety net programs that have been lifelines for our residents, children, and families. With no federal support, a $2 billion cut from Albany, $7 billion loss in sales and revenue, $9 billion budget deficit, no authority to borrow money, this council attempted to ensure that we protected workers, guidance counselors, social workers, educators, many essential workers who have been on the front lines during this pandemic. This has been one of the most challenging budgets that we have faced in one of the worst economic crises we've endured in our tenures. I am thankful for all the hard work and the relentless hours poured into this budget, all done remotely, by the way, by our Speaker, Corey Johnson, our finance division led by LaTanya McKinney, the entire finance team, members of the budget and negotiating team. We've worked around the clock, weekends, late nights, through budget lines, PEG restorations, one-shots, council initiatives, to get to a responsible place. We did exactly what we're supposed to do on behalf of New Yorkers. We did not come to this place and space today easily. We all care about our constituents and their families. My district is one that is struggling right now with the aftermath of COVID, gun violence, food access, stable housing, rent burdened tenants, families who've lost their income and jobs, small businesses who are closed and can't afford their rent, youth in desperate need of jobs, programs, and summer camps. And we are well aware of many of the challenges faced every day in our communities. And I will continue my remarks during my vote. Thank you so much, Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you so much. And now we will have Councilmember Borelli.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Tonight I'm speaking to not my colleagues, but to the public and also the people that will come around 20 years from now and write books about the legacy of Bill de Blasio. Because today we know what we're doing, and we know that what we're doing will create a more violent city, and yet we're doing it anyway. We're making these cuts to appease a fraction of far left New Yorkers, and I understand the politics of that. But we're also making these cuts to continue this false propagation that police officers are the gravest danger to the public, as though less police officers will somehow make the general public safer in New York City. This is what's guiding this decision tonight. And in fact, we know this will be the opposite of what occurs. There'll continue to be more violent crimes. There'll be longer response time for women being victimized by domestic violence. There'll be more, not less, illegal guns on the streets. There's less chance that no one will show up as your house being robbed. There'll be less detectives to figure out who shot that stray bullet. There'll be less investigations into who burglarized your home. All this because as a body, we've decided to compound this falsehood that police officers are the cause of violence in our community. We've convinced ourselves essentially that the sky is purple. Unfortunately, it's not. So from 2018, one of the lowest crime years on records, 23 times an NYPD officer fired his weapon. By comparison, there were 954 shooting incidents. What is more dangerous to the public? Is it this one or is it this one? In every one of these police incidents, the gun was recovered, the shooter identified, and an investigation occurred. Criminality was weighed. In these, who knows? Moreover, in 2018, 95.7% of the victims, nearly 900 on this side, nearly 900 people, 95% were Black and Hispanic. So I ask, which is the real threat to the public, this one or that one? There were 72 shootings last week alone, and not one single was fired by the gun of an NYPD officer. Friends, you're witnessing a moment where we are democratically electing to make the city of New York less safe, and I won't be a passive participant as we undo 3 decades of good work by our predecessors. I'll vote no, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Borelli. We'll now hear from Councilmember Chin.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Majority Leader. You know, this is my 11th budget on the City Council, and it's one of the most emotional, heart-wrenching, toughest budget ever. But it is a budget that begins to address the inequality in the city. We heard the demonstrators in the street when they shout Black Lives Matter, but we gotta turn those words into action and start addressing the inequity across the city. Why is there violence? Because of poverty. People don't have jobs. They live in horrible conditions. And the government for a very long time have not been addressing it. And that's why we want to change that. This is unprecedented that for the first time, we can do something about cutting dramatically in the NYPD budget. It has never happened before. And turn that money to invest in our youth so they have summer job training. They are our future. We got to make sure that they can go to college. And we have to make sure that these programs from the community organization get funded and we were able to protect them. This is the mission that we have to continue. We have to fight against the inequality, the structural racism. We all have to face it because it is happening across the district, across the city. People who are living, doubling up, tripling up, immigration, problem, construction worker dying. Do people really care about these people? The delivery worker who's been working every day to serve food in our city. Do people care about them? We fought for them. And that's why this budget, we worked very hard on it in BNT. And it's the first time the city council is an equal partner. The administration have hundreds of staff, and we only have 48 finance staff. And LaTanya was amazing, and we got to this point. So I want to tell my colleague, we work very, very hard on this. And I'm definitely voting yes. And I urge my colleague to vote your conscience, not your self-interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chin. Parliamentarian, are there any additional members who wish to speak at this time?
Yes, Madam Majority Leader. Council members Menchaca and Reynoso.
Councilmember Menchaca, you may begin.
Time starts now.
Buenas noches. I've been thinking about you colleagues as you each respond to the protesters, the advocates, the activists, the New Yorkers camping outside City Hall. I'm compelled to address it as it is troubling me, colleagues, because we as public servants can do better to de-escalate. The NYPD touts the many hours of training in the academy to de-escalate situations, but so must we. Yet that is not the example that we are setting the past few days. The reason why our constituents are desperately trying to call our cell phones and knock on our doors, as alarming and wrong as they may be in some cases, is because we have failed to create a real space, real spaces for real dialogue on the people's demands. We held one hearing when the public was invited to speak on the budget in May. One virtual hearing in the middle of a pandemic when people were focused on surviving. A 10-hour marathon session that most of us did not even attend. And then a subset group of larger of the council members negotiated this budget behind closed doors, even when the people asked us to include them. No wonder people are protesting. We are failing to create spaces for an honest conversation with our constituents about the things that they want to talk about. Do cops actually make our community safer? Do we think protecting the jobs of cops is more important than protecting the jobs of teachers and social workers? Do we think we get to define our communities, or do our communities get to define us? Why are budgets negotiated behind closed doors rather than openly every step of the way? If we believe in de-escalation for the NYPD, we need to practice it ourselves and have that dialogue. Vote against this budget. But if you won't, be prepared to talk about why all the time and everywhere. Otherwise, we will be going down a path that leads us away from de-escalation, not towards it. We will be failing to be the people's representatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Menchaca. Councilmember Reynoso.
Time starts now.
You could continue to run my clock. I'm sorry. 1 second. Good evening, everyone. I hear my constituents and fellow New Yorkers loud and clear. Our system of policing in New York is rotten to the core. That is not a new truth. Our criminal justice system has been plagued by racist and oppressive practices since the founding of our nation, and I have spent my entire career in office fighting against it. For the men, women, and children who have lost their lives at the hands of the NYPD, Eric, Shahid, Sean, Deborah, Ramarley, and the countless victims whose names we don't know, there can be no peace until we end discriminatory policing practices in New York City. Divestment in policing, a restructuring of our justice system, and meaningful investment in our communities is what New Yorkers have been demanding, and it is our duty as elected representatives to deliver these demands. I believe that the $1 billion worth of cuts to the NYPD budget are the most that we can achieve, are the most we could have achieved with this council. We have moved much further than the near zero cut initially proposed in the mayor's budget. I commend the Speaker Johnson, the finance staff for conducting a democratic process and listening to all voices. In calling for cuts to the NYPD's budget, $1 billion was always an arbitrary number. What we're really pleading for is the end to a system of policing that discriminates based on economic status, race, religion, gender, and sexual orientation, and an investment in the supports and services that will offer the opportunity for success to all New Yorkers. It is my belief that the budget we are voting on today will not bring about the level of systemic change being demanded by myself, my constituents, and groups that are minority-led, like Community United for Police Reform, the Brooklyn Movement Center, Vocal, and Make the Road New York. I've prided myself on always working collaboratively to achieve the results, but on this issue, there is too much at stake. I cannot compromise or settle for half measures today. I am voting no on the FY21 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reynoso. Someone's at my door. Parliamentarian, are there any additional speakers that wish to speak at this time?
No, Madam Majority Leader.
We will now have report of special committees.
None.
Supplemental reports of standing committees.
Report of the Committee on Finance, preconsidered Reso 1355 through 1357, base percentage and base proportion.
Coupled on general orders.
M230 and Reso 1360 and 1361, expense revenue contract budget, fiscal year 2021.
Coupled on general orders.
M231 and Reso 1362 and 1363, executive capital budget, fiscal year 2021.
Coupled on general orders.
M232 and Reso 1364, fiscal year 2021, community development program.
Coupled on general orders.
Preconsidered M245 and preconsidered Reso 1365, fiscal year 2021, tax rate and tax levies.
Coupled on general orders.
Preconsidered LU 665 and Reso 1366, West 49th Street.
Coupled on general orders.
M239, Chancellor 5-year capital plan.
Coupled to be filed pursuant to letter of withdrawal.
M210 through M215 on page 7 and M233 through M236 on page 8, various budget reports and supporting schedules.
Coupled to be filed.
The clerk will now take a roll call vote on all items coupled on today's general orders calendar. As during any stated meeting, you can vote aye on all, no on all, or specify any items you wish to vote against or abstain from. For this meeting, if you say, I vote aye on all and no on the budget, the clerk will record your vote as yes on all, with the exception of M230 through M232 and accompanying resolutions. If you wish to have your vote recorded differently, please specify when voting. I'm going to read that one more time. For this meeting, if you say, I vote aye on all and no on the budget, the clerk will record your vote as yes on all, with the exception of M230 through M232 and accompanying resolutions. If you wish to have your vote recorded differently, please specify when voting. I will now ask the clerk to take a roll call vote on all items coupled on today's general orders calendar.
Adams.
Permission to explain?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. I'm disclosing on the record of these council proceedings that Pearls and Ivy Foundation of Queens is funded in the budget we're adopting, and I'm associated with this entity. And I'm not sure if this applies, but I'm a member of the Greater Allen AME Cathedral of New York, which may still be affiliated with the Allen Community Senior Center, also funded in this budget. That said, as the co-chair of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus, I want to thank all of the members of the BLAC. No matter where you stand on this budget, this was especially difficult for the communities that we collectively serve. Unfortunately, this pandemic created a shortfall in our city, and it was a long and difficult road to get to this point. The mayor's proposed budget was shameful, and it would have negatively impacted communities hardest hit by COVID-19. This has been a painful process, as significant cuts had to happen. Under the leadership of the Speaker, I'm proud of what my colleagues and I were able to accomplish, and I'm pleased to see so many of the priorities that my colleagues and I championed during this process will be included in our adopted budget. There's no better investment than in our youth, and this year's budget will maintain critical programs and services for our young people, including SYEP, summer camps, CUNY funding, Beacon and CASA programs. We worked on a budget that would not let our older adults fall through the cracks and fought for the inclusion of NORCs and senior meals. We secured funding to serve survivors of domestic violence, elder abuse, sexual and physical assault. We invested in small businesses, housing, and worked to save jobs for New Yorkers to help improve economic conditions for all residents. Under such terrible circumstances, we worked on a budget that reflects the needs of our city and invested in areas that serve the greater public good. Yes, this includes a reduction of $1 billion to the NYPD.
Time.
I'm glad to be a part of a body that's focused on addressing the needs of those who have been traditionally underserved. And as a member of the budget negotiating team, I know that this has been a difficult journey, but I'm glad that we could agree on a budget that provides New Yorkers with the services they deserve and need. And one last note, let me just say to my colleagues who are not of color.
Thank
as
you,
was
Councilmember.
a few weeks ago, Madam Majority Leader, 2 seconds. Community do not require an outside ideology to enrich our message. We have hundreds of years of experience with the matter at hand. We learned a long time ago that there is not a price tag to ending systemic racism. There is no panacea to be bought or an elixir to be ingested. When those with privilege put down their torches and return home, our Black, Latino, and Asian communities will remain, and it will continue to be our responsibility to illuminate the path forward for our movement. I encourage my colleagues to vote yes on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Adams.
Humphrey Samuel.
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
My community is in pain. We are hurt. We are angry. We are fed up. And we're also over political rhetoric. New York City was overtaken by COVID-19, and the community that I represent was one of the hardest hit. We lost more than 1,200 NYCHA residents, and so many were left forgotten. Each of those residents deserve the $500 million in capital repairs coming to them in this budget and more. The pandemic has underscored our vulnerabilities and weaknesses and put us in a position to either drive down a hill or off a cliff. Driving off a cliff would have been laying off hardworking New Yorkers, gutting SYEP, over policing stressed out communities while waiting for federal aid that may never come to save us. But we were able to save ourselves. So today I'm choosing to drive down the hill instead by returning peaceful school safety to their rightful place in the DOE, funding SYEP, prioritizing youth and communities, and funding the organizations that kept us alive during the height of the pandemic. Coming out of a global pandemic, we entered a race war. Both have shocked the entire country, not just New York City. We have fought for police reform and more funding every single budget cycle. This debate is not new to me. What is new are the additional voices of concern added to the conversation, which at times have overshadowed our fight. My office was called and advocates were calling for layoffs of workers from Brown and Black communities that are still struggling from COVID. That's 5,000 women who work at the school safety agents today. That does not address police brutality. What are we doing? We address police brutality with meaningful legislation, policy changes, and getting rid of police officers. So as I close, Madam Majority Leader, I want everyone to see my Black Lives Matter t-shirt. To all those who have questioned my love and support of my people, I say to you, when I take this t-shirt, I am still a Black life that matters. And to all that have forgot that, you need to check your privilege and have a conversation with a Black woman about the needs in our community. So I want to thank the speaker for your leadership and to all my colleagues that stepped up to make sure that our communities survive and thrive. And thank you, LaTanya McKinney, for all of your hard work. So with that, I want to say that after all those phone calls, I vote yes on behalf of the residents of the 41st Council District. Oh, and I also want to say that I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceeding that DOE is funded in the budget we are adopting, and my brother is employed by this entity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Alika Ampry Samuel.
Ayala.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
So I come to you today. I'm planning to submit my remarks regarding today's vote online later this evening, but I wanted to take an opportunity to really discuss some of the things that have happened in the last few weeks. This vote was really, it was very difficult for many of us. We spent hours, days locked up trying to figure out the best way to make lemonade out of the lemons that we were given. But I want to say that while I respect and I applaud all of you who took to the streets to demonstrate, to voice your concerns, to stand up for what is right, that it is never appropriate to show up and protest at somebody's doorstep. It is never okay to vandalize someone else's property or call their mother in the middle of the night or threaten a person or their families with physical harm. And that is what happened to members of this body during the last few weeks. Members that have been allies to you on all of the same social justice issues that you're fighting for today. I don't expect that everybody's going to be satisfied with today's vote, but I truly hope that we can figure out a way to sit together as the impacted community of which many of us still are members of, and come up with strategic ways to address all of the systemic issues that we are fighting for. A violent act is not the same as making someone feel uncomfortable. Threatening someone's life is not, it has consequences, irreversible consequences, and it must stop now, and it has to stop with us. I also would like to disclose for the record that Park East High School is funded in the budget, and we're adopting and my child is a student at Park East High School, and that AHRC is funded in the budget that we're adopting, and my partner is associated with this entity. The Children's Aid Society is funded in this budget that we're adopting, and my son is associated with this entity. Heritage High School is funded in the budget that we're adopting, and my son is associated with this entity. And with that, I vote aye on all.
Thank you, Councilmember Ayala.
Barron.
I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that CUNY is funded in this budget we are adopting, and my son is associated with CUNY. I'd like permission to be excused to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you. To continue what I had started earlier, on May 25th, the police killing of George Floyd became the catalyst for hundreds of thousands to take to the streets, demanding justice and change in how policing is done in our cities. The ongoing daily protests have disrupted business as usual. Protesters demand that police be held accountable for police abuse, misconduct, and unjustified killing of unarmed civilians, that they be charged, arrested, brought to trial, and appropriately disciplined, no longer being shielded by federal immunity. In response to this heightened, intense, expansive call for change and justice, states have taken action on bills that have lain dormant for years. Sadly, in some instances, this new attention to these bills sometimes resulted in revisions that weakened the original intent, such as 50A, or new bills being introduced that supplant stronger legal consequences with tepid civil penalties. In 2018, Police Commissioner Shea said that he did not believe that NYPD officers treated the Black communities any differently than they treat the white community. 2 weeks ago, he said, quote, "I don't believe there is systemic racism in the NYPD," end quote. For the NYPD to be led by a man who holds this flawed belief and to have him maintain responsibility for the same number of uniformed officers, detectives, undercover agents, and plainclothes officers who are in no way a part of the reduction for the NYPD is ludicrous. We need a reduction in the ranks of those who are abusing and killing Black and brown people. We need a hiring freeze, no new academy classes, and a reduction in uniformed officers' headcount. The proposal to build youth centers is very long in being completed. It will be 2, 3, 4, or 5 years before those centers that are said to be built will be completed. And just as the city had to pivot on a dime to address the COVID-19 pandemic, we must do likewise regarding the NYPD. There is, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, "the fierce urgency of now," end quote. I vote no.
Thank you, Councilmember Barron.
Thank you.
Borelli.
Thank you. I'd first like to disclose on the record that the College of Staten Island is funded in the budget that we're adopting, and I am associated with this entity. PS 55 is funded in this budget, and my wife is a former employee of that entity, And the South Shore YMCA is funded in this budget, and my son is associated with this entity. With that said, I will be voting yes on preconsidered land use 665 and the accompanying preconsidered reso 1366. I'll be voting no on the rest of the budget items, and I would like to congratulate and just offer a really positive word for our finance staff who worked very hard in this difficult budget year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brennan.
Permission to explain my vote?
You can go ahead, Councilmember Brandon.
Time starts now.
Thank you. I've agonized over this budget and the message that it will send during this extraordinary time. The economic fallout from COVID is worse than we had anticipated. And in order to deliver a balanced budget, we need to close an absurdly daunting gap. No cuts were easy, but no cuts were punitive. Every choice was a tough one. Passing a budget that cuts any of the services or programs New Yorkers have come to rely on is as close as it gets to impossible. But it's our duty as elected officials to do what is best for the neighborhoods we represent and the city as a whole. I'm most grateful for the leadership of my colleagues in the BLAC and the budget negotiating team who have lived and breathed this budget for several weeks. I do believe that we did the best we could considering the brutal hand that COVID dealt. They say a budget is a statement of values, and during a dire fiscal crisis, it must also be a statement of priorities. I know that some who are calling for defunding the NYPD are not satisfied with the cuts that we've made here tonight. I know that the $1 billion that we've cut is not happening in the way that some advocates had envisioned. But police reform doesn't end tonight. There's still much to be done, and the work must continue. Treating all New Yorkers with dignity and respect while keeping everyone safe are goals that can coexist. In the meantime, voting against the budget would mean voting against childcare vouchers, senior centers, and programs that can feed the hungry. Voting against this budget would mean voting against summer youth jobs, adult literacy, and CUNY. Voting against this budget would mean voting against protections for domestic violence survivors and protections for people facing eviction. This budget is far from perfect. We can all find something we don't agree with or something we wish there was more or less of. But in this moment, this budget keeps the light on in this city and allows us to fight another day towards building a better, safer, and more equitable city. And with that, I vote aye on all.
Cabrera.
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you so much, Majority Leader, and to my esteemed colleagues. It is no secret that for several years I have raised the issue of an impending major recession to come, which now has come to pass. A recession which was no fault of our own. But let me be clear, this recession will be with us for some years to come, and we must act accordingly. Given the unexpected challenges of the coronavirus pandemic, we have managed to create a budget that reflects our values, caring for the most vulnerable New Yorkers, our youth, and immigrants, while continuing to provide for public safety and the environment. This has been a difficult and sometimes heart-wrenching process, but I believe tonight we have succeeded. I want to give a special thanks to LaTonya McKinney and the staff for their enormous work that they embarked in the last few months. Mr. Speaker, thank you for helping us achieve a budget worthy of a yes vote. I want to give a special thanks to the Chair of Finance, Danny Drum, who day in and day out, countless hours, he has invested in helping us achieve the budget that we are about to vote on. So with that, I vote aye on all.
Thank you.
Mario.
Thank you. I just want to disclose on the record that my kids attend the College of Staten Island, Wagner High School, and PS 30, and they're all in the budget. My brother works at Richmond University Medical Center, which is also in this budget. Just very quickly, as I've said over the last few weeks, I cannot support a budget that provides extensive cuts to the NYPD. That is why I'm voting no on all, except for land use 655 and 1366. So just to be clear, I'm voting no on all, except for land use 655 and 1366. Thank you.
Thank you. Cohen.
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. First, I am also disclosing on the record of these proceedings that Montefiore Medical Center is in the budget and that we are adopting tonight, and my wife is a volunteer attending at that facility. I really just, I could not vote for the budget without acknowledging the tremendous amount of work that has gone to get us to this point from our speaker, Chair Drum, the entire B&T team, but especially the Bronx reps, Councilman Gibson, Salamanca, and Ayala, for their hard work in fighting for the Bronx. I really just want to thank the finance staff. Isha is always there for us, and I want to say thank you publicly for that. And with that, I vote aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. My apologies, Councilmember Chin.
Thank you. Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Okay. I just wanted to continue what I said earlier, that this is a tough, emotional budget. It's a hard budget, and it's not a perfect budget. When the mayor proposed in his executive budget that he was going to zero out all the youth program, we were shocked. And NYPD didn't get any cut. And that's unacceptable, that we have to fight for drastic cut in the NYPD budget and to make sure that we can fund back our youth program, our after-school program, and the program that preserves the safety net. That's what's the mission that we set out to do. And I think we accomplished that. It's not a perfect budget, but the work is only beginning. My colleagues, we were here when we fought for police reform, fighting against stop and frisk. Black Lives Matters. We all stood together, and we got to continue to do that. And I really want to thank, my colleagues in the BLAC, especially the leadership and the Women's Caucus for your support, because it's tough with the BNT every single night. But our speaker, Corey, you are amazing. And that's why we stand strong with you, okay? You made this happen, that you set out to make sure the safety nets, the most vulnerable, are protected. And so I support voting on this budget. First, I gotta disclose on the record of the council proceeding that PS3 is funded in the budget we are adopting, and my husband works with this entity. Gouverneur Health Nursing Facility is funded in this budget we are adopting, and my mom is associated with this entity. With that, I proudly vote aye on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Constantinides. Oh, excuse me. Cornegie.
Thank you. Firstly, I want to thank the advocates who pushed us through their respective protests, demonstrations, and marches, whether in person or online, through calls or emails. You spoke, and I definitely heard you, which is why we've gotten to a place of substantive police and criminal justice reform, policy, and legislation, and ultimately to an unprecedented budget cut to the NYPD of $1 billion. No one would have thought even 2 months ago this would have been possible. So again, I thank you. Alongside a team of colleagues led by Speaker Corey Johnson and Finance Chair Danny Drum, and with the assistance of Finance team led by Latanya McKinney, we painstakingly combed through one of the most brutal council budgets in history to cut spending in light of a $9 billion revenue deficit due to COVID-19. Amazingly, we're still able to save programs essential to minority communities. For instance, we secured funding for housing programs that prevent eviction and foreclosure, particular dangers given the lifting of the moratorium looming near. We pushed back on a proposed budget that zeroed out programs that serve our youth, SYEP, Sonic, and Compass. We secured significant restorations, and we saved the jobs of school safety agents, the majority of whom, 80% to be exact, are Black women. From the outset, I committed myself to participating in the exercise of negotiating a budget that did the least harm and reflected the needs of the communities I represent and hold dear. There remains a tremendous amount of work to be done to change the culture of policing in this city and reimagine policing overall. I remain committed to that work. The laws we enact and the policies we adopt serve as key tools in continuing the ongoing effort. This budget is not an end to our policymaking as a council. It's not a final chapter. It's not the conclusion of the important discussions we're having around policing and caring for our shared committees. Is this budget perfect? No. However, I'm voting yes to a budget that prioritizes fair student funding and arts and culture programming in our schools. I'm voting yes to a budget that prioritizes summer youth employment. I'm voting yes to a budget that did not allow the decimation of programs designed to support minority and immigrant-owned businesses. I'm voting yes to a budget that prioritizes increased funding for food pantries to address food insecurity in this city, especially in the communities that have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. I'm voting yes to a budget that prioritizes funding for mortgage foreclosure prevention, eviction prevention to help combat displacement and harassment. I'm voting yes to a budget that prioritizes services to our senior population. I'm voting yes to a budget that addresses a police headcount reduction by eliminating the next 2 cadets classes while simultaneously protecting the livelihood of school safety agents. I'm voting yes because my constituents have a reasonable expectation that I balance as best I can the many competing priorities we face in this difficult moment. My constituents also expect that we deliver essential services without interruption to New York City's communities in need. Thank you. If you didn't get it, I vote yes.
Deutsch.
That my son attends CUNY, and CUNY is funded by the budget. As a member of the budget negotiation team, I know how much work went into this budget, and this was not a typical year as we navigated the challenges of a global pandemic and an $8.5 billion budget hole. I thank the finance team, my colleagues, and Speaker Johnson for their work to get us to this point. However, I cannot support a budget that includes defunding the NYPD by $1 billion. It is neither productive for the safety of New Yorkers nor a true reform that benefits the minority communities. Instead, we are making significant cuts to our city's law enforcement at a time when shootings are up by 50% and violent crime is plaguing minority communities. My constituents are afraid, New Yorkers are afraid, mothers are hesitating to send their children out. This is not a time to start making cuts and imposing deeper restrictions on the NYPD. Our police officers are New Yorkers too, working every day to earn a living to support their families and put food on the table. Many cops are people of color who share the same concerns and life experiences as their neighbors, who are advocating for their defunding. Bringing true change to law enforcement and to our city isn't going to happen by making the job of police officers more difficult. It's going to come from working in partnership with advocates and experts to determine where authentic reforms are needed. Again, I do not take this vote lightly, and it is not a reflection on the hard work that was put into this budget. However, I cannot in good conscience support the willful disregard for public safety that I believe this budget is. I must vote no on this budget with the exception of LU 665 and Reso 66. Thank you.
Diaz.
Permiso to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen. We are running in a time where the city of New York crime is going up, murder is going up, shooting is going up, and the only thing that we have to protect us from that is the police officer. By cutting money to police officers, we are putting senior citizen life in jeopardy. We are putting children's life in jeopardy, the bodegueros' life in jeopardy, taxi drivers' life in jeopardy, the community as a whole. We are private houses in private property will be open to vandalism. So honestly, I cannot vote against to put the safety of these individuals and my community in jeopardy. In every group, we have rotten apples, in every single group. And the police officer, we have rotten apples. That doesn't mean that we're going to dismantle them so our community is still get unprotected. So in behalf of the homeowners, the bodegueros, the senior citizen, and the children, and the private and the community as a whole in the 18th Council Marriott District, I'm voting no. Thank you very much.
Council member, I think, is there a disclosure you need to make?
Yes, I would like to say that my son, Ruben Diaz Jr., is a Bronx Borough President, and my other son, Samuel, works for the New York City Housing Authority. Thank you.
Drum.
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Thank you very much. First, let me start off by thanking our speaker for his courageous leadership, his determination, his kindness, and his concern for all New Yorkers. We are very, very lucky indeed to have you as the Speaker of the New York City Council. I want to also thank LaTanya McKinney, Regina Pereira-Ryan, Isha Wright, and the whole finance team, Rebecca Chasen, and all of the members of the finance team for the outstanding work that they have done as well. Let me thank the members of the BNT for working so long and so many hours. Thank you for your cooperation and for your help. It is greatly appreciated. And I want to say that despite many efforts by people to silence or bully us into submission for a minority belief and some of the tactics that were used against some of the members of the City Council, we have been able to put together a budget which I believe addresses the needs of our communities and our communities most affected by poverty, by this pandemic. And so I proudly vote yes on this budget. I have offered other remarks during the Finance Committee hearing on some of the successes that we were able to achieve in this budget, but I am voting yes on this budget now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Drum.
Eugene.
I vote yes on all.
Gibson.
Permission to explain my vote? Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thanks, Madam Majority Leader. In addition to the Speaker and the Finance Division, I also want to thank our amazing Finance Chair, Danny Drum, for your relentless hours of compassion, of consistency, of dedication for everything you've done during this process. This budget process also includes significant cuts to the NYPD, which has not happened for many years and certainly would not have been a priority without this movement in our city and across the country against police violence. Overtime reductions, eliminating the cadet class and future academy classes, reducing uniformed headcount, and shifting the responsibility of the NYPD away from school safety and school crossing guards, majority of whom are women and men of color, and homeless services is really a giant step forward, considering we came from a place of complete resistance and opposition from this administration. This is a process that we know will continue well beyond today's budget adoption. We will work collaboratively with all stakeholders to make systemic changes to reform policing in our city and invest in restorative justice work, holistic services, healing centers, trauma-informed care, and social emotional learning for our children. I thank all of the advocates and activists who have been and continue to be a part of this defining moment in our history, standing up against 401 years of systemic racism and the racism of the COVID-19 pandemic. We appreciate all of your advocacy. This budget has made important investments in summer youth, Work, Learn, Grow, Compass, Sonic, Beacon, Cornerstone, Single Shepherd, FSF, Fair Futures, the CUNY ASAP program, guidance counselors, social workers, school nurses, supporting food access, mental health, legal services, protecting DV survivors, victims of sexual assault, the New York City Crisis Management System, ATIs, and seniors, just to name a few. This budget is painful, but it would have been much worse without the strong advocacy of all of our advocates. July 1st is tomorrow, and community groups needed their funding to start their summer programs. So I will just conclude by saying that this is a real defining moment for us as we make these decisions. And I am choosing to stand up for workers, educators, youth, seniors, and all of our residents of our community, tenants, CUNY students, immigrant families, essential workers, and marginalized and vulnerable communities. This budget is painful, imperfect, and falls far short of much more we wanted to accomplish. We started from the bottom and now we are here. I will vote aye on this budget and thank my speaker, finance chair, BNT, and all the members of this body, the Women's Caucus and the BLAC for all of your collective work. I vote aye. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Houston.
Joan, aye.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you. Thank you, Majority Leader. First, I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that to the best of my knowledge and recollection, PS 175 is funded in a budget we're about to adopt and my wife is associated with this entity. My sister is associated with the Department of Education, which is about to be funded in this budget. CUNY is funded in a budget we're about to adopt, and my sons may or may not be students at CUNY. Bronx Parent Housing Network is about to be funded in this budget, and my brother may or may not be associated with this entity. New York Public Library is funded in a budget we're adopting, and my brother may or may not be associated with that entity. And finally, my family and past associates may or may not be associated with any entities about to be funded in this budget we are adopting. With that, I just want to thank Speaker Corey Johnson along with Jason Goldman for the time they've given me during this process. I want to thank Chair Danny Drum, Latonia, and all of the council staff for the countless hours and the sleepless nights, and my staff. But most of all, I want to remind everyone of the loss of life that we've just experienced and the pain. There isn't a single New Yorker that hasn't lost or knows someone that we've lost to this pandemic. And then the crisis afterwards, which has created further insecurities and instabilities. The questions here that we're about to address or have been very painful ones. What we've been facing has been unprecedented, and no one could have prepared possibly for these challenges. But with that, I have to vote no on the entire budget except for land use items, LU 665 and the occupying resolution 1366.
Thank you, Councilmember Jonai.
Kordenchik.
Just briefly to explain my vote, Madam Majority Leader.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you. First, I'm disclosing on the record that my son is a student at Queens College CUNY, and TSQ Inc. is funded in this budget that we are adopting this evening, and my son, my wife, and myself are volunteers with this wonderful organization. I want to thank my colleagues, especially those on BNT. I know it has not been an easy few weeks, to say the least, and I really want to thank the finance staff led by the great Latanya McKinney, and all the people that I've relied upon as we've moved forward on this budget. And to my friend Danny Drum, those of you who don't know him, who are watching, Danny is a civil rights pioneer, not only in Queens, but in the city of New York and across the nation. And he has been on the front lines for a generation or longer to protect people, men, women, and children in this city and places further for the causes that he has believed in. So I love you, Danny. I want to say that this budget does something tonight that nobody has talked about yet. We're actually lowering tax rates on Class 1 and Class 2 properties for the first time since I've been in the council, and probably the first time in in quite a while. So I'm happy about that. And I want to add to those of you who haven't voted yet, the council has worked very, very hard on this, and these are truly unprecedented times in our lifetime. But if this budget is not adopted, there is a great likelihood that the Financial Control Board will take over the finances of the city of New York. And I cannot abide that. I cannot abide having the wonderful organizations that do work in every corner of this city being cut off because our member items would be gone, our all the initiatives that we love and hold dear would be gone. And these are services that they bring to people. 8.6 million New Yorkers, in many cases, depend on this. So, and they are especially needed today in this time of the COVID, which is not going away. With that, I vote aye on all, and I thank you again for all the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alden.
First, I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that CUNY is funded in the budget that we are adopting, and my son is an employee of this entity, and that New York Presbyterian Hospital is funded in the budget that we are adopting, and my son is associated with that entity. Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
One of the main duties of an elected official is to ensure public safety for his or her constituents. The rhetoric against public safety that we've seen recently is dangerous and irresponsible. It seems that we have forgotten about officers Lou, Ramos, and Familia. What's worse, some members of this body have neglected their duties to public safety and have fallen prey to the mobs of anarchists in our streets. We have forgotten about the majority of constituents who don't believe in the anti-cop rhetoric of the anarchists. We have forgotten about the men and women in law enforcement who on a daily basis go to work because they love and care deeply about this city and want to protect it. From bail reform to releasing dangerous criminals from Rikers Island and the recent bills on police reform, the political class of this city continues to disregard the people they serve. They continue to push for policies that make this city and the constituents they are supposed to protect less safe. They continue their attacks on the middle class, who are really the backbone of this city, by raising their property taxes, adding unrealistic regulations on them, and destroying their quality of life. We have become a body politic that crafts policies from signs at protests, held by people who aspire lawlessness and anarchy, instead of using logic and reason. Today's budget may be the final nail in the coffin for this city and its safety. The bad old days, which I lived through, may come back, and it looks like they are. I'm voting no on the budget because that's what the silent majority of this city expects from us. I'm voting no on all, with the exception of LU 665 with the accompanying resolution 1366. But I do, this was a tough decision. I do want to thank Speaker Corey Johnson. He's worked really hard, along with all the staff, Jason Goldman, the finance staff, and all my colleagues on the budget. I know it's a difficult decision, but because of the police, cutting the police so much, graduating class, that's why I'm voting no. Thank you.
Kalos.
I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that I am teaching my 2-year-old daughter to swim and participating in children's activities with her at the 92nd Street Y. I helped found the 72nd Street Neighborhood Association as an elected official, and I'm an ex officio board member of the Friends of the East River Esplanade, as well as the Sutton Park Conservancy, all of which are funded in the budget we are adopting. Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Coronavirus has claimed the lives of over 21,000 New Yorkers, magnified systemic racism, and blown a $9 billion hole in our city's budget. The mayor's proposed budget left NYPD budget largely intact while zeroing out services for youth, families, and seniors, a budget that would rather invest in policing our children than caring for them. Our budget has grown by $24 billion under this administration, and we've missed an opportunity to trip more than $15 billion in fat before eliminating jobs and essential services. We should cut billions in corporate welfare that goes to a handful of our nation's wealthiest corporations. When we heard George Floyd plead, "I can't breathe," he was murdered by police. It opened the unhealed wounds left in our city from the murder of Eric Garner. New Yorkers took to the streets in the name of Black Lives Matter to demand that we defund NYPD by $1 billion to invest in communities harmed by over-policing. Since then, we've received over 125,000 emails and thousands of calls. Frankly, I've never seen anything like it. As a person benefiting from white privilege, it is my responsibility to use that privilege to empower New Yorkers from all communities, particularly voices of color, Black voices, and listen when they demand that we defund NYPD. As a member of a council that made the mistake of adding 1,300 police officers and increasing the NYPD budget by $1 billion, it is our responsibility to right that wrong. When the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus members led our body in a bold statement with Speaker Johnson supporting cuts of at least $1 billion this year, the Progressive Caucus, which I co-chair, stood in solidarity. The cuts we are voting on today depend on $500 million transfer of school safety agents from the NYPD to public school budget. That seems like an accounting trick. I joined the Speaker and so many of my colleagues in the budget negotiating team who fought so hard in their disappointment in a budget that fails to achieve our initial proposal. This is not a transformative change the NYPD and New Yorkers are demanding. I vote no on the budget and vote yes on all other matters.
Thank you, Councilmember Kallos.
King.
Good evening. Good evening. It's not the next day yet. I'm disclosing on the record for council proceedings that 1199 Service Employees International Union is funded in the budget. We are adopting, and my wife and my stepdaughter are associated with this entity, as well as 100 Black Men is funded in the budget. We are adopting, and I'm a member of this entity. Madam Majority Leader, can I explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Appreciate it. First, I just want to say, as a youth developer and still in the ground, in the trenches, I want to thank Councilmember Rose for your energy, your dedication, the fight, and making sure that the light is still shining for our young people this summer and beyond. For Margaret Chen, me having the largest NORC in the United States of America, in Co-op City, I thank her for a fight and making sure that our seniors are protected, however we were able to manage it. There's a lot of work that had to be done. But I want to just add also to the conversation when it comes to NYPD, you know, regardless of our philosophies or what we think or what we have friends that are on the force, you know, I think it's a shame that if this budget determines one item on the, we're being irresponsible if one item determines how we think for everybody that we have to represent throughout the city of New York and the borough, and for me in the borough of the Bronx. Dollars shouldn't be versus the enforcement of internal policy. We want to do away with bad policing, then it's a policy. If we want to do away with bad police, then that's enforcement of internal rules that have been violated in the violated communities of color. To the BLAC, the leadership, thank you for staying strong and staying true to the cause. To everybody that's on BNT, those who are in the Bronx, from Salamanca to Ayala to Gibson, thank you for standing strong, and Cohen leading the delegation. I appreciate it. To everybody in the speakers team, we say thank you. I say thank you. LaTanya McKinley and the finance team, go take your Calgon bath, enjoy the summer, do what you got to do. This is a budget that was responsible in the times of perilous times that we're dealing with. So to all the advocates, as I say, thank you for engaging, because I say people pay attention to people who participate. We heard you, we're listening to you, but we have a responsibility to look at the totality of everything that we have to manage during these trying times. And today we vote on a budget that allows us to shine the light on to live another day. With that all being said, I vote aye, and congratulations to all.
Thank you, Councilmember King.
Cool.
May I explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time
Thank you,
starts
Majority Leader. Yeah. This is a painful budget with cuts across the board. It's not perfect, but it's going to keep us moving forward. Let's not be naive. We all knew this was going to hurt. Revenue is down, Americans are out of work, and we are not going to heal until we stop the bleeding. So I will be voting in favor of this budget with the understanding that we have to move our city forward toward recovery. And we cannot do that burying our heads in the sand and pretending everything is fine. Regarding the police, no one wants to see us return to the bad old days. We need our police to protect and serve, but we also must recognize the need for training and reform. I also want to speak specifically about the parks, which have remained open throughout the pandemic and serve as the only source of refuge for New Yorkers. Coming off last year's historic increase, the cuts ahead are going to hit hard. I'm happy though that All is not lost. I'm very grateful we were able to secure $10 billion for city park workers and gardeners and support of our community gardens. These are important elements of our parks that will do much to keep them well maintained for the next year. At the end of the day, our budget needs to reflect our economy. And next year will not last forever. We will stop the bleeding, we will heal, and we will begin to restore the people's faith. I would like to thank our speaker for the unenviable task of passing one of the hardest budgets we have ever had. This was no easy task, but he has done a good job of building consensus in a time of division. I also want to thank Chima, Monica, Natalia, and the entire finance team, and also our dear Chair Drum. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ku.
Kozlowitz.
May I be excused to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
I've said this many, many times. This is actually, I've always said 20th budget. It's really my 21st budget. I have done budgets under 4 mayors and 4 speakers. While there were budget cuts in many of those budget years, this was by far the hardest budget we ever did, that I ever did. I want to thank our speaker, Corey Johnson, for the grueling events that he had to go through. For his leadership, he has done a wonderful, wonderful job, and I so appreciate it. To Jason Goldman, who took many phone calls, and to Superwoman Latanya McKinney and the entire finance staff. I am going to vote aye tonight for the children of our city, for the seniors of our cities, for people who need the social services of our city, and for the educators of our city. This is not a perfect budget, but it's a budget that will serve many, many people. And it's amazing that we got to this point with the deficit that we faced. So I vote aye.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Lensman.
May I explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you. In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mayor de Blasio proposed balancing an $8 billion deficit on the backs of our youth and most vulnerable, while essentially leaving the NYPD budget untouched. This council, through this budget, has completely flipped that switch. And we did it by listening to the people, our constituents. In this budget, we preserve the social safety net for seniors and the poor. We defend immigrants from deportation, renters from eviction, and homeowners from foreclosure. We ensure that our young people are engaged, challenged, supported, and guided. We keep municipal workers working and bringing home a paycheck. And we right-size the NYPD for 2020, forcing a transformation in how safety is defined and achieved in our schools and how our homeless population is engaged. Reforming policing and the criminal justice system is nothing new for so many members of this council. We've led the way in reducing the city's jail population to the lowest level since World War II, decriminalized the most common low-level offenses, forced the city to make far fewer marijuana and fare evasion arrests, got the DAs to extinguish hundreds of thousands of old warrants, passed the Right to Know Act, eliminated fees for posting bail and inmate phone calls, made it easier for former inmates to vote, kicked ICE off Rikers Island, and provided lawyers to immigrants facing deportation, quadrupled funding for alternative to incarceration programs, and funded district attorney reforms like a wrongful conviction unit on Staten Island. And that, my colleagues, is the abridged version. So, for making meaningful cuts and reforms to the NYPD, and for saving the social safety net, criminal justice reform spending, and youth and education programs, I vote aye on this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Lander.
Request permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Thank you. I want to thank our tremendous finance staff led by Latanya and Regina, as well as the budget negotiating team, Chairs Rose, Traeger, Gibson, Finance Chair Drum, and especially Speaker Johnson for your tireless work. You fought for and won restorations that really mattered: fair student funding, summer youth programs, CUNY ASAP. And I want to honor the Black members of this body for your lifetimes of leadership in pursuit of civil rights. There has never been an easy time to be Black in America, but this is an especially difficult one. We honor it, and I feel grateful to serve in this body with you. I am voting no on the budget tonight. Over the past month, since Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were killed, an unprecedented movement for racial justice has taken to the streets, led by Black leaders, but including a multiracial, multi-generational coalition pushing for fundamental change in how we approach public safety. We have made many incremental reforms in this body, but they have not gotten the job done. So a clear demand emerged from longtime police accountability advocates led by Communities United for Police Reform to shrink the NYPD budget by at least $1 billion and prioritize investments in communities of color. Reducing police spending is both a first step to transforming our approach to public safety and a fiscal necessity. According to the Vera Institute, New York City spends far more on policing than other cities. We have one officer for every 162 people, LA one for every 308, Houston one for every 360, Phoenix one for every 380. But this budget does not meaningfully shrink the NYPD budget. While it imposes a hiring freeze on teachers and counselors, it does not even extend that hiring freeze to cops. Put simply, we are not making the kinds of cuts needed to reduce the footprint of policing, to protect public health, our social safety net, and balance the budget. Now, we aren't going to transform our approach to public safety in one budget vote. So however you vote tonight, I hope we can work together to follow the lead of the Minneapolis City Council, who voted on Friday to replace their police department with a new Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention. We urgently need to get away from having policing as the primary response for every public safety problem, from mental health to domestic violence, to homelessness, to school safety, to reckless driving. That is the real path to transformation in how we achieve public safety. I vote no on all of the budget bills, and I vote aye on the remaining non-budget items. And I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that Women for Afghan Women of New York City is funded in this budget, and my wife is a board member there. Bard High School is a New York City public school funded in this budget, and my daughter is a student there. And finally, speaking of family members, I am really sorry for those of you who have had loved ones targeted, including the speaker. It's unacceptable. We are working to build a city where everyone is safe from harassment. Let's get to work together to build it. Thank you.
Levin.
Madam Majority Leader, I'd like to disclose on the record that CUNY is funded in this budget, and my wife, Ann Carroll, is associated with this entity, and STREB is also funded in this budget, and my daughter, Frances, is associated with this entity. Madam Majority Leader, may I explain my vote?
Go ahead, Councilmember Levin.
Thank you,
Permission
Speaker.
granted. I'm sorry.
My colleagues and members of the public, I first wish to thank Speaker Corey Johnson, who has acted with honesty and decency and kindness at all times during this process. I want to thank members of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus, Chairs Drum and Gibson, Jason Goldman, and the members of the Speaker's staff, Finance Director Latanya McKinney and her unbelievable staff, who did the hard and unglamorous work to make this as just and equitable a budget as we were able to do. I also want to recognize the thousands of people who have written to us, protested us, and marched in the street for transformative change in our city. This is the most difficult and heartrending budget in recent memory, certainly that I've been a part of. And that is why I am voting yes on this budget. I see it as my responsibility to do my best to stand up for those in greatest need. And that's very easy in good years, and it is very difficult when times are hard. As the Speaker and my colleagues have said, I too am disappointed that we weren't able to go further with cuts to the NYPD, particularly with regard to cutting additional classes from the police academy, which would have resulted in an additional approximately 100 reduction in headcount. That said, Mayor de Blasio was unwilling to move on this, and doing our own budget would be potentially catastrophic. Because we were unable to achieve this, that does not mean that the effort was in vain or that this budget does not reflect our values. It does. This budget is dissolving the longstanding MOU between the NYPD and the Department of Homeless Services. There will be no NYPD homeless outreach unit, no coordination between NYPD and homeless services, which will result in fewer New Yorkers on the street being harassed by the NYPD or coerced into doing something they do not want to do with the threat of arrest. That ends now. And with the move of the school safety agents to the DOE, it is far from a shell game or sleight of hand. We have the opportunity to reimagine what school safety looks like for our future, and that work must start right away and be led by the community, like how they are doing, like how they are approaching this in Oakland and in other cities. But I do believe that the current school safety agents should be part of this process. I want to again thank all of my colleagues, BNT members, and everybody that has throughout New York City that has invested so much in this budget process, and I hope that we can maintain this level of engagement as we do this really difficult work moving forward. And with that, I vote aye on all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Levin.
Levine.
Thank you. Madam Majority Leader, may I please explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank you.
Starts now.
This is a crisis budget in the middle of a pandemic and economic collapse and a long overdue reckoning with racial injustice. We have many obligations in this difficult moment. We have an obligation to provide adequate resources for our public health fight against COVID-19, a fight that has already cost billions and is far from over. We have an obligation to protect the social services which vulnerable New Yorkers, already battered by coronavirus, are desperately depending on. We have an obligation to transform policing to once and for all end the disproportionate and too often violent targeting of Black and brown New Yorkers. This budget does not achieve all of those goals, but it does fend off devastating cuts that were slated to hit the social programs that are vitally important to young people and CUNY students and seniors and people who are facing food insecurity. This budget avoids laying off what could have been thousands of public sector workers, the overwhelming number of whom would have been people of color and women. This budget provides billions for the next stage of our fight against COVID-19. This budget does not go far enough in transforming policing in the city, but it does take a step forward. And it must be followed up in the days ahead with a relentless, ongoing effort to bring real accountability for police misconduct, to end disproportionately aggressive policing in Black and brown communities, to ensure much stronger protections for peaceful protesters, and to ensure that police can no longer be the first line of defense in mental health and addiction response. If this body fails to pass the budget tonight, the City Council risks losing all control. We risk what could be a budget catastrophe for every cause I have just mentioned. So I will be voting aye with enormous gratitude for the leadership of my African-American colleagues and with a firm commitment to the long fight ahead. And lastly, if I may just disclose on the record of the council proceedings that I have a son who attends City College of the City University of New York and a son who attends Columbia Secondary School. And both of these are funded in the budget we are adopting. Thank you, Madam Majority Leader.
Thank you.
Lewis.
Madam Majority Leader, I'm disclosing for the record of the council proceeding that MTA, Coney Island, York College, Brookdale Hospital, and Braggs will all be funded by the budget we are adopting, and I have sisters, brothers, and a mother that are all associated and or employed by these entities. Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Budgets are a reflection of our priorities, and the people of New York have made these priorities clear. The fallout of COVID-19 drastically impacted our budget process, but I believe that without this pandemic, the many disparities Black and brown people experience in small business, healthcare, housing, and education systems, it would not have exposed how detrimental it is these disparities are. COVID has shown us how racially divided we are as a city. I am proud to be a member of the BLAC and a co-chair of the Women's Caucus and part of our city's movement that pushed for police reforms. I am proud to have advocated alongside my colleagues to deeply cut the NYPD's inflated budget by $1 billion. I know that this cut wasn't perfect. We have much more work to do, but I truly believe that this cut and this budget addresses the needs of my community and makes a meaningful dent in the NYPD's budget. I am proud we were able to restore SYEP, Cornerstone, Beacon, CUNY ASAP, increase fair student funding, provide housing assistance, guidance counselors, and social workers jobs. To my constituents, protesters, and advocates across the city who have worked diligently to express and fight for their needs, I heard you and I hear you. And I'm committed to a future free of police brutality, intimidation, and injustice by the NYPD. Thank you, Speaker Johnson, Majority Leader Cumbo, Jason Goldman, BNT members, Latanya McKinney, and the entire finance team for your hard work and your diligence. I vote yes on this budget and all. Thank you so much.
Mizell,
Yes on all.
Menchaca,
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
We did our best to protect the safety net for our youth, our immigrants, our Black and brown communities impacted by COVID. But really, this budget protects the police department that is brutalizing our neighbors, locking them up, separating them from our families, and criminalizing our children in our schools. The demand to defund the NYPD was never about a number. It was about questioning the fundamental approach to public safety that condones killer cops, racist policing, and mass incarceration, no matter who wears the blue uniform. They say budgets are moral documents that show us who we are and what we stand for. Well, I am walking with the people marching on the streets. The advocates working for decades to reform the police and close jails. And most importantly, the incredible voice of our New York youth who have risen to the occasion and flooded our public hearing demanding NYC budget justice. And Red Hook and Sunset Park youth, we see you. Yes, we did our best, but sometimes our best is not good enough for the people of the city. I vote no on all the budget items and yes on land use item 665 and the accompanying resolution 1366. And colleagues in New York City, I am hopeful because in the streets right now are the next members of the city council and the mayor who will lead us to a better future. And I am ready to follow them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Menchaca.
Miller,
Good evening. Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank
Time
you,
starts
Madam
now.
Majority Leader. I'd first like to begin by disclosing on the record that the Alpha Phi Alpha Senior Center is being funded in this budget, and my mom attends the center. I now would like to thank the members of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus for their months of steadfast deliberation and participation, not just on this budget, but in advocacy and their commitment to our prospective communities during in the midst of an incredible COVID-19 crisis and nationwide social unrest in response to violence and even death perpetrated on Black lives at the hands of police officers. And in the midst of all of this, that we as a caucus, you have remained steadfast and been able to manage the business of the people and not get caught up in the hype, and the hyperbole, even the personal attacks. We have all remained focused, and I thank you for that. And being able to remain focused in serving the 5 million New Yorkers that we are tasked with serving is important. That those needs and values of those communities of Black, Latino, and Asian members are reflected in this time, and particularly in this budget. And because for that, I want to thank everybody for their steadfast advocacy. It is not easy in this climate. And I'd like to thank my colleagues in the council that aren't members of the caucus for their advocacy and their support as well. But certainly I'd like to thank Speaker Johnson. I'd like to thank him for his leadership, his thoughtful support, and for him listening and hearing the call and the voices of these Black, brown, and Asian folks throughout the city. And because of that, we were able to address the needs of these communities. So I want to say to the others that are out there that police reform did not begin nor end with this budget. To believe that would dismiss the Community Safety Act and not recognize what this city looked like prior to that, it would be to dismiss the work that all of my colleagues have done over the past few years in police reform, from Right to Know to all of the low-level reforms that have been done, including marijuana reforms that have disproportionately impacted communities of color. And certainly it would be to dismiss the package of really impactful legislation just passed by this council and our colleagues in the state. And so understand that these reforms only occurred by engagement and the thoughtful discourse. We hear you and we have engaged you, but please do not dismiss the work that we have done and the work that we will continue to do on behalf of police reform and on behalf of all the citizens of the city of New York. I look forward to working with my colleagues as we move forward.
Thank you.
On this just budget, and I will be voting aye on all except for resolutions 1355 through 1357. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you, Councilmember Miller.
Moya.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank you.
Time starts now.
Coming up with a budget is a process that is inherently fraught with conflict. On one hand, I believe that a budget is a statement of values and priorities. On the other hand, it's an imperfect document. It can't be everything to everyone, and it has to balance our causes with compromises. And that's never been more true than this year, as we've been faced with unprecedented circumstances. A pandemic that's claimed the lives of nearly 25,000 New Yorkers and disproportionately Black and Hispanic New Yorkers. A pandemic that's also created a recession that followed that has left nearly 1 in 5 New York City residents unemployed, a $9 billion budget deficit, and a moral imperative to use the budget to make real and meaningful advances for racial justice. The Black and Latino communities have borne the brunt of the COVID crisis. We got sicker at higher rates, we died at higher rates, we're out of work at higher rates. Every aspect of the pandemic and the economic crisis has hit us the hardest. That's why, as a son of immigrants who was born and raised and still lives today in a majority minority community, and as the co-vice chair of the Black, Latino, and Asian Caucus, I'm proud of the work that we've done here. In addition to slashing $1 billion from the NYPD's budget, we managed to save almost every immigrant initiative, from the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project that provides legal representation to immigrants facing unjust deportations, unaccompanied minors and families, CUNY Citizenship Now, the Adult Literacy Program, Day Laborers Workforce Initiatives. We restored summer youth employment programs. I said publicly as the budget negotiations began that I wouldn't support a budget that gutted things like education, immigrant and social services, but spared the NYPD. This budget meets that bar and reflects a more equitable cuts and saves almost every immigrant initiative. But budget cuts alone won't be enough to solve the problems in policing or institutional racism. Firing police alone won't fix flawed training. One budget was never going to be the answer. And we need to be better than a hashtag and commit to real policy changes. We need police who live in our communities, new curriculum and staff at the academy, and educational requirements in fields pertinent to enforcing laws.
It's been an honor and a privilege to champion these initiatives that make a difference in the lives of the historically underrepresented and under-resourced neighborhoods. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank Speaker Johnson for his incredible work in getting us to this point. I want to thank Jason Goldman and of course, LaTanya McKinney and the entire finance staff for their dedication and their hard work that got us here. And with that, Madam Majority Leader, I will be voting aye on all.
Thank you, Councilmember Moya.
Thank you.
Madam Majority Leader, I want to apologize again. Thank you to Councilmember Moya and to other members for thanking Jason Goldman, who every member here knows has literally, I think since the beginning of March, not taken a single day off and has worked with every member here in a thoughtful way. So I am so grateful to Jason. He has a small child like you, Madam Majority Leader, and has been balancing that. We couldn't do this without him. We couldn't do this with the entire staff. I want to thank all the staff at the City Council, but especially Jason for his hard work. We're really grateful to him. So thank you.
Perkins.
That I'm voting aye on all, and above and beyond that, I'm disclosing for the record of the council proceedings that the Board of Elections is funded in the budget we are adopting, and my wife, Pamela Green Perkins, is associated with this entity. And so I just wanted for the record make sure that there's no conflict in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Perkins.
Powers.
I'm disclosing on the record of the City Council proceedings at Mount Sinai Hospitals in the budget we are adopting. My mother is associated with that entity. Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. This has been a very difficult and tumultuous time here in New York City, and this budget is going to be the first of a number of budgets where we have to pull the city out of an unprecedented fiscal hole that's been caused by COVID-19. It's also going to be one of the first and many inflection points on a path towards tackling systemic racism in this city and in our approach to criminal justice. And I'm voting yes today in the interest of taking a step forward in both of those important goals, with the recognition that we have a lot more work to do. We have to act both with a level of urgency in doing that. In the last 3 or 4 weeks, we have been doing that, while recognizing that this is going to be a persistent and aggressive focus on this goal. I think there are goals that are very attainable if we continue to stay focused, accept this progress, and build on today's reforms and the recent legislation that we passed. Whether it's continuing to reform policing in our schools or having a serious conversation on the role and the headcount of police in a major city like New York City. I believe we can get there, and I wouldn't be in public service if I didn't believe that we can achieve those goals. And while there are times in these last few months, including right now, where these all feel so difficult and impossible, I believe in New York City to meet that challenge, and I believe in us to continue to respond to these challenges that lay right before us. The last few weeks have been very difficult, as a lot of us have tangled these big questions and fought over what should be in this budget and what has to be the difficult decisions. But I want to appreciate my colleagues and where we disagree. You guys are thoughtful and have really engaged this seriously. I want to thank my constituents. They have responded to this moment. They have engaged in a thoughtful dialogue. They've exchanged ideas with me. And together, we're going to continue to do more in the coming months to build on this work. And we're going to continue to do the work that we've been sent here to do, to reform and to keep acting upon this. And I just want to thank the staff here at the City Council, but I also want to thank my staff who have been helping to answer the calls and talk to add their voice, my constituents and throughout the city in the last few weeks. They are just a young, talented, and remarkable group, and I'm proud of them every single day. And they really have been responding to this moment and sharing really thoughtful ideas with me about what comes next. So I know that we all agree that the work doesn't end with today's vote. It is a step towards progress. It is rebuilding. It is reforming. We have a lot more work to do. I hope we all do this together, whatever you vote today, and we'll all be a little bit better and a little more thoughtful as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Powers.
You vote, council member?
Excuse me?
I think you guys, Councilmember Powers vote.
Yes, I vote yes. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Yes or no? Thank you.
Yes.
I pause. Richards.
I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that Challenge Prep Academy is funded in the budget that we're adopting, and my wife is associated with this entity. Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
First, I would like to thank Speaker Johnson, who I believe did everything in his power to ensure communities like mine that were hit hardest by COVID-19 would be prioritized in this budget. And I want to thank him for defending his members in this institution, even at his own expense. I've spent the last 48 hours wrestling with the decision whether to vote for or against this budget, especially since I've never voted against one. However, my concern with this budget is not just about the $1 billion cut, but more about the NYPD's culture. A $1 billion budget cut can't address systematic racism that runs rampant within the NYPD. Today, we must send a clear message that it's not okay to kettle peaceful protesters, that it's not okay to place Black and brown New Yorkers in a chokehold as they gasp for air. We must send a clear message that it's not okay to shoot unarmed Black men like Sean Bell and Ramarley Graham. Tonight, we must send a clear message that no one is above the law, not even the NYPD. Now, let's go through some of the facts on this budget. And I've had the pleasure of chairing the committee, which has overseen the police department. Let's talk about overtime first. There are no safeguards to ensure the NYPD will actually adhere to the reductions in overtime they've committed to this fiscal year, like they do every year. Secondly, fringe benefits, regardless of whose budget line they're under, shouldn't count towards cuts. This is called creative accounting. I want to thank Speaker Johnson for his work on ensuring that we do cancel 2 police classes, but there still isn't a binding agreement that city workers won't be laid off later in the year, although the NYPD will still be able to not have it freeze enacted. Lastly, even with school safety being transferred, there hasn't been enough details fleshed out in advance of this vote to ensure protections and real reform in our schools will take place sooner than later. While I have other concerns, these are but a few. As chairman of the Public Safety Committee, it is my hope that as we move through the remainder of this year and beyond, that this administration seriously works with the council, community stakeholders, and local communities on the finite details of a real plan to chart a new course on what policing should look like in our city in the 21st century. I will end with the words Dr. King spoke so eloquently in 1963. The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. With that being said, I am voting no on this budget, and I vote aye on the rest of everything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Richards.
Reynoso.
I would like to disclose on the record that my wife is a mental health counselor for the Foundling Incorporated, which is funded by the City of New York. I would like to vote no on all budget items and vote yes on all land use items.
Thank you, Councilmember Reynoso.
Rivera.
First, I must disclose for the council record that the NYPD is being funded in the budget and my mother is an employee there. Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. This budget vote, like many of the decisions we've made in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, finds us attempting to address multiple crises caused by systemic racism. That's an almost impossible task, and one made even more difficult by our federal and state leaders who know fully well that municipalities have little to no power to explore new taxes or implement debt financing. Regardless, we will need the state to be a serious partner going forward. Given all of this, Speaker Johnson and his team have gone above and beyond to meet this moment. Speaker Johnson, the Finance Division, and our budget negotiation team tried harder than anyone could have imagined to drag the mayor to the negotiating table. For the first time in decades, the city's budget negotiations addressed some of the funding inequities between the NYPD and our community programs. This took a hell of a lot of work, and it should be lauded. My vote on this budget was always going to be guided first and foremost by the mayor's commitment to invest sufficient dollars into our Black and Brown communities who have been most impacted by the stark inequities in education, housing, and healthcare. We knew that the best source of these dollars came from the NYPD, particularly their funding for enforcement in spaces where police are clearly not the solution. While this budget will result in some officers in schools and homeless outreach being moved out of NYPD, the mayor would not accept the removal of police from other roles or even seriously address the failure of the NYPD to dismiss officers who have committed clear acts of misconduct or abuse and remain on the force. Because the mayor decided to draw his line in the sand here, I cannot support the resolutions and communications related to the FY21 budget, and I'm voting no on all budget items. Now we must all look to the future. When I first spoke to advocates about their call for cutting the NYPD budget by $1 billion and reinvesting those funds in our communities, we all knew that the fight, whatever the outcome, would only be the first step in a much longer and larger fight to radically change the way we think about public safety. Whatever way you cast your vote today, we can all pledge to work together so that one day we can reach that future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Rivera.
Rodriguez.
Permission to explain my vote? Yes, go ahead, Adonis.
Time starts now.
I think that we need to put our conversation today on regard to this budget on perspective. Being a council member from 2009, there was no police reform from 2009 to 2013. Not at all. I think that now coronavirus, George Floyd, have put the real New York City in perspective. We are the results of a society built for more than 400 years with a racist system. I think that this budget is not the ideal one. We should never have to make decision between SYP, ASAP, and reducing funding from the NYPD. Being this my 10th budget, sharing this experience with many of my colleagues here, this is like the budget dancing cycle that we've been living years after year. I think that this should be only a beginning where we should invite all colleagues here to please share the privilege that many of those communities that are composed by middle class and upper class has in our great city of New York. So hopefully this is only a beginning of reforming the police departments. We need to recognize the job done by the good police officers, as we recognize the good job of that people do in different areas. At the same time that we need to remove the bad apple and to change the system that we have built in the city. So I'm voting aye with this budget, understanding that this is only a beginning, or a lot of things that we need to do, especially addressing poverty in immigrant, Black, Latino, and Asian community. Thanks.
Thank you.
Rose.
Commission, I am disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that the New York City Department of Sanitation is funded in the budget we are adopting, and my son is associated with that entity. Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Thank
Time
you.
starts now.
I am voting no on Resos 1355, 1356, 1357, M245, and Reso 1365. And I just want to thank all of the young people for pushing us to this point, for relentlessly raising their voices. And I say, keep it up. We hear you, and hold our feet to the fire. For my colleagues, I want to thank you for the civil discourse that we were able to engage in this evening. And to Speaker Corey Johnson, I can't thank you enough for the compassion that you brought to all of these discussions. You were differential to the feelings, the concerns, and the wisdom of the BNT members. We wouldn't have gotten here if it wasn't for your sage leadership. And for my BNT colleagues, I can't thank you enough for your vocal advocacy and your tireless support. If you never backed down, you always said that the youth had to be our priority, and you did everything that we needed to do to make sure that they were. And to Latanya, Regina, Isha, and Michelle, I have to say their names because they are phenomenal women who shepherded us through this budget, putting us a step closer to making New York City a more equitable city. And for those of you who tried to use this budget as a litmus test for our concerns for Black lives, I just want you to know that every decision that was made to protect the social safety net and to protect the most vulnerable New Yorkers. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councilmember Rose.
Oh, and I vote. Oh, wait. I vote aye on the budget, and no on those others that I stated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenthal.
Permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
I'm voting no, and I want to make sure my no vote is understood. I'm voting no because this budget imposes sacrifices prompted by COVID and the economic downturn on people who can least afford it. I'm deeply moved by Black Lives Matter and support the call to defund the NYPD. This budget does not meaningfully demilitarize our police force nor reduce its true scale. More centrally, this budget does not address our core fiscal problem, a revenue shortfall. These cuts and those to come will hurt the very people most deeply impacted by this crisis. The work of so many of them is deemed essential, but their welfare apparently is not. More New Yorkers will face economic desperation with tragic results, including renewed calls for more policing. A better way to approach this revenue shortfall is through a combination of spending cuts, borrowing, and new sources of revenue. It's ironic we're in this situation because our city council speaker, mayor, and public advocate have all, to one degree or another, supported borrowing authority. The city controller, conversely, has not. If borrowing was a good idea after 9/11, it's a good idea now. Our response to the Great Depression was to find every possible way to put people back to work and mitigate human suffering. The remaining tool is to identify and advocate for new sources of revenue. The state, if only for 1 year, should unwind the rebate of the securities transfer tax. It's fair to ask those profiting from financial markets and government support for those markets to repay a portion of the benefits they have received. I'm voting no today to call attention to these shortfalls and to move the ball forward to a more fair and sustainable solution. I'm voting no on the budget and aye on all remaining items.
Thank you. Salamanca.
I'm disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that New York City Department of Parks and Recreation is funded in the budget we are adopting, and my wife and my son are associated with this entity. And may I have permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time
Thank
starts
you.
now.
Thank you, Majority Leader. I want to thank Speaker Johnson, Latanya, the entire Finance Division, Chair Drum, the Black Caucus, Jason Goldman, Ebony Meeks, Anthony Perez, and members of the BNT for the countless hours going line by line, item by item, identifying ways to restore programs the mayor failed to fund. While my colleagues and I agonized over tough decisions, we fought hard to save programs and initiatives needed to rebuild post-COVID, such as summer youth employment and youth programs, healthcare services, housing and anti-eviction services, food insecurities, senior services, and education, to say the least. While not perfect at all, Mr. Speaker, we did the best that we could with the cards we were dealt with in this pandemic and financial deficit. And with that, I vote aye on all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Salamanca.
Torres.
Yes, I want to disclose that funded in the budget is the Department of Finance, which employs my brother, and permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
First of all, I want to recognize the Speaker for shouldering the burden of leadership in a moment of crisis. Mr. Speaker, you've had the impossible challenge of substantially restructuring the NYPD's budget amid public protest and sustaining the social safety net for communities hit hardest by COVID-19 while closing a $9 billion deficit, all without state or federal support. Never has a speaker been expected to do so much with so little. I do not envy your position. Even those voting no must acknowledge that the speaker did the best he could in the face of overwhelming opposition from the mayor, a historic $9 billion deficit, and continuing neglect at the hands of a federal government that has told New York City to drop dead. It is true that the city council could have in theory passed its own budget, but in practice, the mayor has the power of impoundment. The mayor could have unilaterally defunded the very community-based organizations upon which all of our communities depend for vital services. In choosing to negotiate a budget, a tragic necessity in a system of checks and balances, the speaker wisely chose not to take the risk of further endangering non-for-profits that cannot afford to be defunded in the midst of COVID-19. Non-for-profits hanging by a thread cannot afford to be casualties of an indefinite power struggle between the mayor and the city council. This budget is admittedly full of disappointments, but I ask myself, should I vote against a budget that invests over $500 million in the creation of new community centers, that promotes fiscal equity in public education, that preserves after-school programs and jobs for underserved youth in places like the South Bronx, that manages against all odds to do an enormous amount of good for an enormous number of people in the face of a crippling $9 billion deficit. As a council member who represents some of the poorest communities in the city, I do not have the luxury of voting against critical investments in employment, education, and equity. My community does not have the luxury of sacrificing those investments in a political power struggle with the mayor, who again has the power of impoundment.
Time.
The speaker negotiated the best budget he could, given the dreadful hand that he was dealt, and for that reason, I will vote aye.
Thank you, Councilmember Torres.
Traeger.
I am disclosing on the record that 721K is in the budget and my father is associated with this school. And permission to explain my vote, Majority Leader.
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
This is the hardest vote that I've ever had to take in the council. This was supposed to be a budget that spoke to our moral priorities, making sure that the trauma our children are experiencing during COVID-19 pandemic was temporary, not generational. We have succeeded in restoring some of the mayor's most punitive cuts, but ultimately this body was reduced to fighting for crumbs. We are in an unprecedented fiscal situation at the very end of the budgetary food chain. What little relief came from the federal government for education was quickly expropriated by the state. The state passed along devastating cuts with another $8.2 billion in cuts to aid to localities that still has not been specified looming. The mayor put forth a deeply punitive executive budget, prioritizing funding cuts to direct services for children. The administration has overwhelmingly rebuffed the alternative cuts proposed by this body, both to the NYPD and to other agencies, cuts which would have shifted the pain away from everyday New Yorkers and towards administration. Much of this in the service of the mayor being able to claim that we're passing a budget without layoffs. Mr. Mayor, that is disingenuous. The human service workers, mostly women, people of color, who will be laid off, they matter. Their families matter, regardless of whether their paychecks say the city of New York on top. Since I became chair of the Education Committee, I have focused on making changes to better support kids and make them feel safe. There are more school safety agents than there are school counselors, social workers, and psychologists combined. There are over 2,000 more school safety agents working in the DOE today than there were in 1998, when the zero tolerance Giuliani administration transferred them over to NYPD. Last year, Majority Leader, if I could explain, because there's a lot of education stuff in this budget, I appreciate the extra time. Last year, I and my colleagues had to fight like hell to get 200 additional school social workers hired. This year, the mayor proposed cutting 25 of those positions, social workers for high-need schools and students in temporary housing, and we again fought like hell to keep them and succeeded in restoring them. Over the past 2 years, I fought hard to lift a hiring freeze on social workers and counselors, and I'm disappointed it is being reapplied at a time when we need them more than ever. However, I am grateful that today we were able to secure a commitment to include school safety agents in the hiring freeze as well. Last year, my colleague Diamond Richards and I fought to change language in the DOE's MOU with the NYPD that allowed officers to enter schools to execute arrests and to give principals more of a say in the evaluation of safety agents in their buildings. This year, we call for the MOU to be canceled and for a transfer of the school safety division from NYPD to DOE as a first step to enable the development of a more restorative model. The transfer of school safety back to DOE undoes a Giuliani-era zero tolerance model and a hiring freeze on school safety agents, and I'm proud that we're taking this first step. But make no mistake, we should not be taking a victory lap, what is only a preliminary agreement. There is still ambiguity in what the path forward looks like. I will be fighting to ensure that arrest power and handcuffs are removed. We need to develop a more restorative model with the council, labor, educators, schools that have been doing restorative justice work, and the most importantly, the youth who are directly impacted by school safety policy at the table. To the advocates who have been absolutely essential to shaping my advocacy and in challenging me to go farther over the past few years, Girls for Gender Equity, Dignity in Schools, New York City Liberties Union, AQE, Urban Youth Collaborative, and many others, I know that this budget is a disappointment. I appreciate our continued dialogue through disagreement and am committed to continuing to work together to ensure that school safety is fundamentally reimagined in a way that centers the holistic needs of children. I am a former high school teacher, and I understand that kids respond to trust, not to authority. There is much more to do. Acknowledging the place, Majority Leader, I'm ending now my final paragraph. Acknowledging the places, there's so much education here, and I just want to make sure we get it out. Acknowledging the places where we fell short, I am proud of the hard-fought victories in this budget. The mayor proposed a $100 million cut to fair student funding, which would have resulted in teachers, counselors, social workers being excessed from schools across the city. We fought hard, and that cut was restored. The mayor wanted to cut Single Shepherd, a program which pairs middle and high school students in the South Bronx and Brownsville with a dedicated counselor or social worker who stays with them through college at a 100-to-1 ratio. This is exactly the kind of program we need to contend with the immense trauma that our kids have undergone over the course of the pandemic, and I'm committed to vote against any budget that cut that program. I want to thank the educators, the school leaders, the advocates, my colleagues who've been rallying around this program. I want to thank Single Shepherd. The council has also been very vocal in making sure that we have nurses in every school. This agreement that we're voting on today, there's a commitment to place a nurse in every school building in their school system, and we still, of course, need more details on that. Finally, I am grateful to Speaker Corey Johnson. I am grateful to my colleagues for standing with me to fight for our schools when the mayor literally even yesterday was saying no to Single Shepherd. The mayor of New York was saying no to social workers as of yesterday morning, and Corey Johnson said, no, we're going to fight back to add more social workers and counselors and single shepherd for our schools. It's not even in his district, it's not in mine either. It's in Central Brooklyn in the South Bronx, and Corey Johnson got it done. I want to thank all of my colleagues for helping me and helping us get this done. And there's a lot of accomplishments that, that will make a difference in kids' lives, even though there's so much more work to do. I want to thank the education committee staff, the finance staff. LaTanya, you are the best. And my staff, Anna Scaife, my chief of staff, who's outstanding as well, and the entire staff. And with that, I vote aye, Majority Leader.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Traeger.
Ulrich.
Permission not to explain my vote.
Permission certainly granted.
Thank you. I vote no on everything, and I wish everybody a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vallone.
First, I'd like to disclose on the record that the St. Andrew Avellino Athletic Association is funded in the budget, and I have been a passionate volunteer soccer coach there for over 15 years. New York Junior Tennis League, Citizen Schools, and YAI are also funded in the budget, and my father and brother are associated with those entities. Madam Majority Leader, first to say good morning, and may I have permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
I'm with
Today,
you.
we are faced with a crisis that this city has really never faced before. The perfect storm of the COVID pandemic, which crippled our city's financial stability, combined with the call for social justice, have all merged into a very different reality when we started 2020. All of us, no matter where we stand or fall on the economic spectrum, have been impacted by this pandemic, and we now must make extremely difficult decisions to lead this city forward. Leadership by its very nature must lead for all New Yorkers. From our new immigrant brothers and sisters to our multi-generational families, we have all chosen New York City to be our home. Our finance and budget negotiating team have worked day and night to find some way forward, and we must give tremendous credit to LaTanya and her entire team. For that, we are always grateful to our speaker, Corey Johnson, and his dedicated staff. We will never find the perfect balance when it comes to reforming and preserving the men and women who keep our city safe. Just last week, we took historic strides forward and passed legislation that truly committed to immediate changes. This council reformed police procedures, accountability, and how policing is conducted in our city. Now, this budget will redefine the role our school safety agents play in our schools, safety in our public transit system, and how we interact and provide for our homeless New Yorkers. These are continued steps in the right direction. Policy changes, legislation, accountability, training, and how we police are all positive changes. But removing officers from our precincts and streets, I still believe, is a mistake. It is true that due to this unforeseen and unprecedented crisis, cuts will be felt across every city agency. But only one agency is fundamentally charged with keeping our families and children safe. It is my hope that we as a city immediately evaluate the rise in serious crime and reallocate the funds necessary to give our local precincts and communities the resources they need to keep all New Yorkers safe. Once again, I want to acknowledge our speaker, Corey Johnson, our finance chair, Danny Drum, our Queens delegation's hard work and negotiation, which resulted in a budget during this crisis that overall I and many of my colleagues can support. I vote aye on all.
Thank you.
Van Bramer.
I am disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that Breaking Ground is funded in the budget that we are adopting, and my sister Dawn is associated with this entity and devotes her life to working with the homeless. With that, I'd like permission to explain my vote.
Permission granted.
Thank you.
Starts now.
So I've heard a lot tonight about mobs, anarchists, bullies, a small minority of people pushing. All of this feels to me like an attempt to minimize a mass movement for social justice. I came out as a gay man in 1989 when queer men were dying in droves, and ACT UP was loud. It was impolite. It pushed the status quo. It made powerful people uncomfortable. They were rude, and some people thought they went too far. I myself participated at a die-in in front of George Pataki's home when he was the governor. But activism and activists saved lives because they pushed the envelope and because they pushed people in power. Systemic and structural racism and police brutality will not end as a result of polite requests. Power doesn't concede, it gets taken. The young people out there, yes, activists, they are angry because we have not listened. They are angry, and they are right to be angry because so much is wrong. And we as elected officials should be listening with great respect and admiration, because many of us began our careers as activists who were in the streets. And just because we're in government today and got elected to the city council doesn't mean we no longer have an obligation to listen and respect activists. That's how things get done. That's how things change. And that's why I'm voting no on this budget, because we didn't do enough. We didn't get to where we needed to get to. We failed in too many important ways to fundamentally change the way this city is policed. And so I cannot vote for this budget because I made a pledge. I made a pledge not to vote for this budget unless it cut the budget of the NYPD by at least $1 billion. And in that vein, this budget fails miserably. So I vote no on the budget and aye on all the rest.
Thank you,
Madam
Councilmember.
Majority Leader,
Yes, parliamentarian.
can we please recognize Councilmember Ulrich before moving on with the next member?
Yes, Councilmember Ulrich.
Councilmember Ulrich is here.
Councilmember Ulrich, do you have any disclosures to make on the record?
Yes, I wish to disclose on the record that I am an adjunct professor at St. Francis College, an organization, an entity which is funded in this budget, not by me directly, but by this body. And I believe that is the only disclosure I have to make on the record.
I thought you wanted to change your vote to a vote on all on aye.
No, I haven't had that much to drink. Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. Thank you very much. I still wish to vote no on all. Thank you.
We'll call
Madam
on you.
Majority
in a little
Leader,
while later.
we should also recognize Councilmember Jonai.
Councilmember Jonai.
Thank you, Majority Leader. I'm clarifying and further explaining my disclosure statement. On CUNY, my boys are considering going, have not finalized their decision for summer classes, and in doing so, I'm disclosing that they may be attending CUNY or taking CUNY classes during the summer. And to further elaborate on the New York Public Library, which is being funded as budget, that my brother, I have good reason to believe, I know that he is involved with the libraries and may be associated with this entity. Thank you, Majority Leader.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Jonai.
Councilmember Yeager.
Madam President, may I be excused to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Time starts now.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to try hard not to repeat much of what has been said on the floor tonight or this morning, particularly because the majority has already recorded its vote and the budget will pass. But it does, I think, be worth mentioning. The budgets, as been said, are balancing acts. In this body, people don't agree on everything. I think that's very clear. I have agreed and disagreed with members of this body on both sides of the aisle. I have agreed and disagreed with members of this body from every community, from every borough, sometimes more difficult than others in our disagreements, and sometimes our agreements and partnerships have been tremendous. And I think what we saw on the floor on Thursday was an example of that, a broad cross-section of representatives in this body coming together to speak up on, for example, taxation. And we've done that in the past together on other issues as well. For me, there is no one particular item in this budget that galls me to the point of voting no. It's not that at all. I think it is important to note, as has been said on this floor, that the Speaker, Mr. Speaker, his team, the Chief of Staff, the Director of the Finance Division, members of his body who attended hearings. I attended nearly every single finance hearing during the preliminary and executive budget process, although I'm not a member of the Finance Committee, because like most members of this body, I care deeply about the present of our city and the future of our city. That's why I ran for office. I've said often on the floor of this council, Madam President, my time is about to expire. I ask your indulgence briefly.
Please continue.
I've said often on the floor of this chamber that giants have walked these floors before I. I believe giants will walk long after I'm gone. It is an incredible honor to serve in the council, to be one of 51 members representing the people of New York City, truly the greatest place in the world. For me, I think as I cast my vote, there are going to be some who will attribute meaning to my vote beyond my words. I urge you and encourage you not to do that. My words are what I say they are and nothing more. Perhaps I have a luxury of recording my vote after the majority has already recorded its vote, and perhaps therefore I can do what I want at this point. You'd be wrong as well. The record of this chambers will show that I am frequently a sole no vote. I vote my conscience. Today I'm not a sole no vote, but I will be a no vote on the budget package. I believe that I channel the will of the people who sent me to the council in doing that. It's not to say that any one particular issue, as I said, is why. I traveled around my district today in between the two stadiums, and as I saw the vast numbers of trees fallen in my community, I couldn't help but think about the fact that this budget is going to cut the pruning program in the Parks Department. There are going to be fewer sanitation pickups on the baskets on our corners. At the same time, there is no cut to the number of people who are going to walk around and write summonses. We're moving the traffic enforcement people over to an enforcement division that will focus on writing even more summonses. It's been said before by both sides of City Hall. I have a big problem with putting $500 million into the Department of Education that isn't going into classrooms. I have a problem with that. Now, I know that there are good reasons to do so. On both sides of City Hall, that agreement was made. I understand that. But to me, if $500 million is going to move over from another agency into the Department of Education, we ought to figure out ways to do more for the classrooms. I think that's important. And from my point of view, representing a district where the majority of children do not attend public schools, I think it's an important point of view that somebody ought to say, and I'm saying it. And I know that there are good people in this council who believe that as well. I've taken enough time, and it's long after the time when this meeting should have ended, and I appreciate your indulgence, Madam President. I respectfully and with gratitude to Mr. Speaker for giving me this time and for giving me the opportunity to work with him and members of the council. I vote no on all with the exception of LU 665 and accompanying resolution 1366, and I honor those deeply who vote in a different way than I, but this is my vote tonight. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilmember Yeager.
Cumbo.
Thank you. I am disclosing on the record of the council proceedings that the New York City Department of Education is funded in the budget we are adopting, and my sister is employed by DOE. I want to just first start off by thanking Speaker Corey Johnson. As all of you have heard tonight, Councilmember Johnson had the difficult task of working with 51 members with very different opinions and very different ideals. And he was able to come together to create a budget package that reflected each of the goals and aspirations of all of the council members. Now, for some, it wasn't enough. For some, they wanted to push further, and we're going to continue to work to get there. But Speaker Corey Johnson, as you see, had a tremendous task of hearing and listening to the diversity of opinions of all the council members. This council had a tremendously difficult task of addressing the totality of racism that is embedded in every single aspect of our city's agencies during a time when we had to fill an almost $9 billion budget gap. Racism is intertwined and interrelated in almost every single way throughout every agency. It is not simply advocating for a $1 billion reduction of the NYPD. This is more than hashtag deep. Ending systemic racism and dismantling racism in the NYPD and throughout every New York City agency is hard work. It's continuous work. It is a marathon. But we attempted to do that by fully restoring programs such as the CUNY ASAP program, fighting to completely restore CUNY scholarships for deserving students, fighting for fair student funding, restoring summer youth employment, because our youth, they have to start their summer employment this week. We could not continue to debate over a budget that was going to force our young people to continue to languish at home. We're protecting our theaters of color, institutions that have taken decades to be built, fighting for after-school programs and alternatives to incarceration so that people can live full lives. And that's what this is all about. Many people wanted to see a total elimination of school safety agents within our schools to reach the goal of $1 billion. Because for many, the number was more important than the goal of actually dismantling racism. But as a Black woman, and many Black women in this council, we did not support the firing of over 5,300 school safety agents, 70% of whom are Black women and heads of their households in the middle of 2 global pandemics. I can't wear a Black Lives Matter t-shirt and at the same time fire 5,300 Black people. Our school safety agents have the ability to be a part of the process of reimagining what safety in our schools actually looks like. I feel inspired with all of the calls and text messages that I have received. I now have got your number too, and we have an army of people that hopefully will work with us to come up with solutions to really work together to dismantle all forms of racism in the NYPD and every agency across the city of New York. I hope that outside of the protests, rallies, and phone calls, that this level of advocacy will continue with working with us to roll up our sleeves, to provide and deliver food for our shut-in seniors at NYCHA who are still dealing with COVID-19, to create after-school programs for our young people in our community centers, particularly in NYCHA, that are in desperate need for programming, helping us to dismantle racist testing systems that prevent young people from attending our world-class schools, making sure that our children in foster care have mentors, that we can create educational curriculums that eliminates white supremacy, which is at the foundation of the racism that we see each and every day. But it is important that Black leaders from our community are leading this charge, that our elders are respected and are part of the voices of this movement. The Black Lives Matter movement demands that it be led by Black voices with proven leadership in our communities. The principle in Kwanzaa of Kujichagulia means to define ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves. And that's what this moment is about. And so I want to thank my colleagues for listening and hearing. This has been an incredible discourse. This is just the beginning in terms of the dismantling of the NYPD's budget. We have one more budget cycle left for many of the council members that are term limited out, and we will have that opportunity in order to create best practices, to have those deep conversations, to understand how people feel all across the city of this New York. But with Black voices being at the forefront of that movement, I proudly vote aye. I also want to give a very special shout out to my entire staff for all of their work in this. And I also want to recognize Ebony Meeks, who has just been incredible. We've heard her daughter throughout all of the Zoom conferences, participating as she held down her family, but made sure that we went line by line in this budget cycle to get to where we are today. I thank all of you. I dedicate this to our children. This is for the next generation. And thank you, Speaker Corey Johnson. And I proudly vote aye on all.
Speaker Johnson.
I want to thank my staff, Jason Goldman, Celine Mizrahi, Ebony Meeks, Anthony Perez, Genevieve Michaels, Jen Firmino, the entire staff for their tremendous hard work. Again, LaTanya McKinney, Regina Pareto-Ryan, Isha Wright, the entire finance division. I want to thank the sergeants at arms and Carl D'Alba for their really hard work throughout this entire process. The Chief Sergeant, Raphael, I want to thank you for your diligence and hard work. So I'm grateful to all of you. I look forward to discussing next steps on what we can do, because we know this is the beginning, not the end. And I vote aye on all. I also want to thank Joanna Castro, who has been wonderful in making sure these Zooms are working, and she's been fabulous as well. So I want to thank her. I want to thank our IT department. I want to thank everyone.
We will stand at pause until today's vote on the items on the general calendar have been tallied.
Get ready, Madam Public Advocate. Majority Leader Cumbo, excuse me.
Given their promotion, not mad about it.
Okay. The vote on all items for today's general order calendar are as follows. Resolutions 1355, 1356, and 1357 have a vote of 37 in the affirmative, 12 in the negative, and no abstentions. M230 with resolutions 1360 and 1361. It has a vote of 32 in the affirmative, 17 in the negative, no abstentions. M231 with resolutions 1362 and 1363 has a vote of 32 in the affirmative, 17 in the negative, and no abstentions. M232 and resolution 1364 has a vote of 32 in the affirmative, 17 in the negative, no abstentions. M245 and resolution 1365 has a vote of 38 in the affirmative, 11 in the negative, with no abstentions. Land use item 665 and resolution 1366 has a vote of 46 in the affirmative, 3 in the negative, and 0 abstentions. And finally, M's 239, 210, 211, 212, 213, 214, 215, 233, 234, 235, and 236 have a vote of 40 in the affirmative, 9 in the negative, and no abstentions. Thank you.
Thank you. I now formally declare the executive expense revenue contract budget, the executive capital budget, and the community development program for fiscal year 2021, all as modified and all in accordance with the relevant sections of the New York City Charter, as hereby adopted as of 12:26 p.m. on this 30th day of June 2020.
Madam Majority Leader, I think you mean 12:33 a.m. on July 1st.
That's right. 12:23 a.m.
12:33.
12. You have to excuse my computer; it's a little behind. As hereby adopted as 12:33 a.m. on this first day of July 1st, 2020. Is that right?
That's right.
It's July. Introduction and reading of bills.
All bills have been referred to committee as indicated on today's agenda.
Madam Majority Leader.
Yes, parliamentarian.
As a point of parliamentary order, we want to note for the record that there was a majority of votes in favor of the budget prior to midnight on June 30th.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you. There are no resolutions on the resolution calendar, so we will now move into general discussion. Parliamentarian, are there any members that wish to speak at this time for general discussion, or have all members spoken during their vote?
No, Madam Majority Leader, there are no members who wish to speak at this time.
I'll now call on Speaker Corey Johnson to close today's stated meeting.
Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. I am so glad that you get to now spend more time with your beautiful son, Prince, who is a gift to this world.
Thank
you are an incredible mother, and you've done a great job throughout this entire process. So I know this has been hard for you, and I love your son. I was there the day he was born.
Thank you.
And I'm just grateful for you, Lori. So I want to thank you, Madam Majority Leader. The stated meeting that started on June 30th, 2020 and ended on July 1st, 2020 is hereby adjourned.
Thank you.
Peace. God bless.
Thanks,
Good job,
everyone.
madam.
God bless. Good night.